Let's roll. This is Countercharge, your podcast for ranks, flanks, and kings of war. Join your hosts as they delve into the world of Panithor and bring you worldwide coverage of all things Kings of War.
Welcome to Countercharge. I'm Mark Barber.
I'm Kenny Lowell.
And I'm Nathan Arnold, and we are here to talk with Mark about, well, some very old history for him, and that is Steps to Deliverance. We figured, you know what, let's start at the beginning. Let's go all the way back before we can get into the next books in the series that Mark has put forth in recent years. I had done one podcast about Steps to Deliverance with Mark. It feels like forever ago. And I'm sure someone can go back through the Countercharge history, go back to that and listen to it at some point. But we're going to assume that no one has heard that and just kind of jump in the way we normally do for the books. We'll go through our standard walkthrough. We have the non-spoiler section. So if people have somehow not read this book and you've been listening to Countercharge, I don't know how you can't have read this book by now. But it's possible, I suppose. So if you haven't read it, we're not going to spoil anything until we get into the spoiler section and get into the details and the nitty-gritty of the book. But there's going to be some stuff we talk about first. And I will, again, it's one of those areas where, Mark, we probably did something similar, but we always have to start off with anyone that is quote-unquote new to Loremaster's library, really kind of what got you started in fantasy reading. What is your fantasy reading origin story, Mark?
I guess probably similar to loads of people. So over in the UK, secondary school age, kind of like 11 to 18, got into the whole tabletop miniatures thing. And I kind of like the idea of story reading, story writing. Did some stuff, went to university at 18. I tried to get published. Back then, that was self-publishing, all that stuff. There was no option for that. It was always traditional. So failed cataclysmically for a few years. Years go by, and I ended up with an opportunity to write a non-fiction. So I did military history stuff on World War I and World War II aviation. That then led into being a historical consultant for War Thunder, for Gage Entertainment. That then led into writing for Bolt Action for Warlord Games. So I'm kind of like, right, now in the wargaming industry. And doing some World War II stuff for them. And then they started up Gates of Antares, which didn't last too long. But I wrote a sample piece for them about how I'd set up one of the new armies. And I did a short story for it. And they kind of came back and said, absolutely hate your ideas on how to build an army in a game, but we really like the short story. So would you be interested in maybe doing more of that? So I got put in so I thought that was like a cheeky kind of side door entry into it. It wasn't. I got lumbered in with a Winged Hussar publishing competition with everyone else. But that went well. So my short story got picked. I then went into a novel. Gates of Antares kind of collapsed on itself. So I was speaking to Brandon, and he said, well, what do you think of Kings of War? And it's like, well, Kings of War is something I've never played, but I'm very aware of what it is. You go on a UK-based miniatures wholesaler, the big companies over here. Of course, 40k will be plastered all over it, but Kings of War's up there with the heavy hitters. So yeah, that was it. That was how it started. I said, yeah. So we came up with Steps to Deliverance, and said, yeah, Steps to Deliverance. You'll be third in the publishing queue, and that all went wrong. And here we are with the series opener.
You were the first author to publishing novel for Kings of War, and you are still the most prolific author to publish for Kings of War, and you've kind of moved into Armada, which I will throw into the same Kings of War general label because we know they're connected. Really, what was it like to have that first novel be the only thing that was out there, and then see people kind of coming along behind you and, I'm not going to say jumping on the wagon because they weren't. It was a path that you were forging. So what was it like to sort of get ahead of everybody else even if that wasn't the original plan, how did you feel, and how does that feel now, multiple books into the history of writing these novels?
Oh man, good question. To start with, anything kind of artistic, if you can call it that without sounding pretentious, you kind of bare in your heart and soul a little bit. So it's pretty nerve-wracking because there's like, okay, so this game's been around for quite a long time. It's got an international player base. You kind of go onto social media and just go, here's a tournament in Australia that's sold out, and it's big. It's a big game. I remember writing those first few pages and thinking, geez, this could be an enormous world one day, and I'm just sat here in my living room on a laptop making stuff up for a multi-million-dollar international franchise where we're kind of, there's not much to fall back on. When you go to some other IPs, there's a lot to fall back on because there's so much out there. But the early intent of Kings of War, I think, was always a tournament game. It was always about a slick, balanced rules, fast rule system. It wasn't necessarily about the lore in the early days, so there's less to fall back on. So it was, you kind of like, but narrative gamers, people who take, I don't know, D&D 5th Ed and just shove Panathor in, all these people who love the background. What if I'm writing stuff that is absolutely polar opposite to what they've built in their head? And yeah, it's a nerve-wracking thought to think there's going to be a lot of people out there who do like this sort of stuff, and I hope I get it right. Particularly as it was back then, as someone who didn't even play the game. At least now I can fall back and say I've played the game a lot, so that it makes more sense. But back then, I was learning, I was teaching myself the game as I was writing the first novel.
That's a pretty interesting approach. Not having played the game, playing the game as a part of getting that first novel. And we'll talk about battle scenes. We'll talk about how that looks. I think at the time, a reader for the first novel in Kings of War, when I read that first battle scene, I was like, yeah, this is it. This is how I feel when I have a Kings of War battle in my head. This is the narrative that I see working alongside it, and how things work and how units move and what that feels like. And we've seen a big evolution of that in the writing from other authors since then. I think you nailed that initial intent of how do we show the game in a novel, and knowing that it wasn't a game that you'd been playing for a long period of time is really, really interesting, because you were trying to pick up that and get the novel done at the same time. That's pretty cool.
It was easier than I've made it sound as well, because to be fair to the rule set, as much as there's the magic, the fantasy elements, the core mechanics of a rank and flank war game based largely on the medieval era, I think they're pretty realistic at a base level in terms of the way units move, the way you can't just charge all over the place with no thought of how you're going to maneuver a unit, the way that you can charge down a slope and get an advantage, flank charge, all this stuff. It's pretty historically realistic as well. So for anyone who already knows the medieval history a bit, it made the transition a lot kinder, I guess.
All right, we're gonna shift, and we're gonna get into some details about the book itself. So I'm gonna start, and Kenny, I'll kick this to you first. But because this was the first book, this was the first thing out the gate, why should somebody bother reading it now, Kenny?
I think a few reasons, right? So you touched on some already. It's a really good introduction. Like it's very accessible, and I think it gives like a broad overview of the game and the world. And like there's like key parts like the mythology. There's like that story about the mirror breaking and everything for that. Like if you're a new person getting into it, right? You don't really know. It's like, okay, it's a war battle. It's a war game. Like, what else can they throw into here? And I went back. So this is the second time I've read it, or to be fair, listened to it, and I was just like, I kept catching new things here and there that you would want to know as like a point of reference, and then you can see how easily that translates to like your games, like actually building your miniatures and playing the games and such. And so like obviously I'm not a big fan of the books, and so I kind of like pimp them out to everybody I know, and we play. But we've had somewhere like somebody in our local gaming group has started playing Kings of War. They go back and they read one or two novels in general from the line, and then they come back and they really have like that point of reference, like it's like visually coming to life, and like the creativity, like the juices have been stirred there. So I think this is like what did I tell somebody? I think I called it like broad spectrum antibiotics at one point, but I meant that like in a good way, because it comes out and just covers so much. Like the level that it's at, like it's not it's not difficult to read. It's not like a slog as it goes through, but they cover so much. There's a range of characters. I think anybody who might be worried about not that you can see this in an audio media, but like I'm doing air quotes for like representation or however you want to look at having a diverse group of characters in there. Like it just ticks all these boxes, and it really brings out I think like the cinematic war elements. Like the second time I went through it, I just picked up more and more. Like you get this feeling, this buildup, and it just didn't try to like shoehorn every single race or everything in there. You just you picked something I think that's the most like universal and recognizable. I'm sorry, I'm talking forever here, but it's all good stuff. That's like recognizable, and I think that people can relate to. So I think it's a really convenient book to set in for Warhammer, for example. It was easy in a way to bring, I think, some people, like we found doing tabletop game and the role-playing game, a bit easier to bring them in, because you could point at an actual globe, or a map of like at least Europe and something, and be like, this is that army, this is there, and you can easily identify it, so they know like kind of some concept of the army and such. And where this book here, because it is a made up world, it's not so easily and like obvious like one-to-one to our world. You kind of have to open the door and see what some of these different areas look like. And I thought this was just like a really broad look. Like it covered so much. They referred to other key geographical points, and even where some races are and some battles. And it did that in a way where that if you know nothing about where to start, that it provided that. Because sometimes with these big fantasy books, and I always like when people, when publishers put like a map in, or at least like some crucial maps at the beginning, but you don't always have that. So I think that this was really like an easy to understand way to get a broad picture of like the realm and the setting itself in your head. And I apologize for talking so much. I actually really liked it, obviously, as you could tell. And I was just kind of thinking this morning some different ways why. Like it's a book I recommended to a lot of Kings of War people in our area to like start with.
No, I think that's a good insight. I think you're kind of saying some of the things that I believe about a reason to pick this book up. If it's not the first book someone reads in the library of novels about Pannithor, I'd probably say it's in the first 3 that someone should read. And the reason is if you love dwarves, if you love halflings, if you love goblins, start there. Start with the things that are about the thing you love, and you get that taste of the world.
Right. Yeah.
This novel, and as we get into the other novels in the series, we'll get into more of the details there. But this novel is truly a look at this world. Get a bigger picture of this world, even though it's in a small scope, even though the scale that we're talking about is not spanning the globe. It is what I hoped it would be, and that was, hey, this is how Pannithor works. This is how this world about this game actually operates. And there's a lot of doors that are very briefly opened and then closed again. And it gives you that taste and that desire to get a little more information, get more details. I know one of the folks that had asked questions in Facebook when we posted about it was, hey, where are we going to get more Easter eggs as we get more of these books, as we see more of these things? Because I know, Mark, and we'll probably talk about it as some of that comes up, that the Easter eggs you threw in here where you said, hey, I want to introduce concepts and ideas that players have about this world. I want to introduce them into the world for real and put them in there. And those are those little vignettes, those little just tidbits of information that, yeah, you may not know about Skullface, but dude, you can't read the name Skullface and everyone's amazed that someone went toe to toe with Skullface and be like, okay, hold on, there's something here that I don't know about yet. I need to know more about that.
Right.
And that is not that the other novels have missed it, because they haven't, but there wasn't a, to me, intentional focus to say this is a world that we need to bring everybody into, and not just be for people that really like the Basilean side of things, or of course the Vissels, because we'll get into that too. Mark, what are your thoughts now, again, going back to this being that first novel, and your approach to pulling in readers that at least you would say is relevant to readers now that haven't jumped in yet? And do you feel that your approach and how you carried that out still works the same, or is there any changes you would have wanted to make to make it a better first novel for everyone later on?
A couple of different things to address there. Easy one to start with, I suppose. What would I change it? Yes. Every single one of these books you do, you hope you get a little bit better. That doesn't always happen. There's stuff I've done since Steps to Deliverance that I've looked at and gone, I think Steps to Deliverance was, air quotes, better for whatever reason. But there's still stuff I change. I think the start of that book is slow. So I trim it. I trim it down. The former Basilean Legion captain's fall to the abyss is too fast. So that in its story, that could be a story in itself, and that's not a story I'd be interested to tell. That's not my kind of writing. I could have spanned that out a little bit more without slowing it down into making it, an art house piece about inner demons or whatever. So there's certainly stuff I'd change. But the thing is, I'm not. Whilst we all want to get better at what we do, you need to look at yourself after every project and go, come on, be honest. What didn't go as well as it could have done, and what can you do better? You've got to do that. But I'm not going to fall on my sword as much because it was the first one. And the massive advantage that we've all got now, myself included, for everyone I do, is you look at the reaction to Steps to Deliverance and say, the whole community didn't go mad and uproar about this, therefore I can do more of it safely. Because on that first one, you don't know. I've written the first novel for 3 wargaming franchises, and it's not comfortable. It is not comfortable at all. All the ones after that are much better. So if I knew what I know now, I could have done a better job at Steps to Deliverance. But for a first one, I think it's the best I could have done. So hopefully that answers that. I would change stuff, but I'm not going to go really English about it and just start apologizing profusely like Hugh Grant in a rom-com. But is it a good launching point? I totally agree with what you said about pick the faction you're interested in. There was a time where you didn't have much choice. You were going to start with Steps to Deliverance because that was it. But that's not the case now. There's tons of them out there. And if you want to get invested in this, I don't think it's a case of someone told me I really got to read the Horus Heresy series. But you've got to start with book 1. You must. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. I used to be a Dark Angel player back in the day. Can't go straight to Dark Angels. You've got to read them in order. Okay, fine. That is not the case with what we've done here. Pick the faction you're interested in and go for it. So I don't think Steps to Deliverance needs to be a starting block, but I hope I wrote it in a way that it can be, that it's a broad brush, that it's simple, and it's easy to get into. I always consider myself within these franchises, I'm not the fine dining author, I'm a fast food author. It's I try and go for broad appeal. I'm not trying to get prizes or anything.
That's interesting way you put it. And so my opinion on each of the books, and every book that we've done a review on, I would recommend a different book to a different person after talking to them about what they wanted out of it. Steps to Deliverance is the one that I'd kind of put on my list of, you're going to want to read it. Like it's up there simply because the scope that it gives you in terms of how the world works. And it isn't so Basilean in the same way that something like Pride of a King is so dwarf, and Ascent of the Goblin King is so goblin. It's not that Basilean, but you learn enough about it, and you learn how especially their balance or the war against the Abyss works. I learned in the reread of it, because again, second time reading it was an interesting way to approach this. I learned so much more about the Abyss and how it works than I remembered. And it made that part of the world so much more interesting. If you're an Abyssal player, read this first. Like, even if they come out with an Abyssal book, this is the book you read first, because it is that broad spectrum of, from a human's perspective, how does the Abyss work? Why are they the bad guy? Why are they so terrifying? What's the thing that you're looking for? And I think that's you mentioned not diving so deep into that, perhaps, but I would slightly disagree. And we'll get into the spoiler section. We'll probably go through hey, here's what we change, here's what we adjust. But I think getting that background, getting that information, seeing somebody turn, seeing that transition helps in that first book, or in that first few series of books, or how does this world work kind of perspective. So it's interesting. I appreciate your perspective from there. Kenny, any thoughts from you on Basileia? But yeah, just you jump in. You don't need me.
Yeah, so you mentioned the Horus Heresy, and that was the first series, the first book, really. Like the Black Library, who's like the publishing arm of GW, has like ever had, like they've ever done, that's gone to the New York Times best-selling list for the first time. It was book 12, A Thousand Suns by Graham McNeil, and that was like the first one. And then they started, having more that showed up on the best-selling list, and then you can always have like, well, from a best-selling series. And I think one of the big things about that, for people that don't game, or they're interested in gaming, or they do a different type of gaming, or they're sci-fi fans, they don't play miniature games or Kings of War, like there's a universality to the Heresy books. I think that is why they are so successful and reach people who don't even like play the game, aren't interested, and hopefully become interested even more. And I felt like going through this the second time with your book here, that you hit the same like tone, as far as like it's very universal, and then like especially including like the Abyss and how they are, what they specifically are, as far as like the circles and such, and how they're represented, as opposed to like generic bad guy in another game. I mean, there's having an army mostly essentially humans. I think is also easy to wrap your brain around. So because I'm still a new-ish player. I mean, like I've been doing this now, like this game, Adepticon was a year, so I'm still relatively new to the system, and I thought this was just like a really great one, and why I'd recommend it too is like you can conjure up in your head the ideas and what's going on, and kind of fill in some of the blanks if you don't know. And I don't, I know I keep saying that, but I don't want to like understate that, because like on my show, like I'm interviewing authors now that are with Wing Hussar, and we're doing some initially where it's like kind of introduced to the author, and then like some of the books, and building up on that. So it's not quite the level like that we do the deep dive here. And so I always send people over to these amazing episodes that you guys do here. But that's so useful, right? And that's like when I get books, like I just got some books to give away. Like this is obviously one of the ones I would put in there. I think just like if they were doing like Dungeons and Dragons, whatever, and they can start with like a fighter or something. Like you can wrap your brain around some of these, especially like video games, and how prolific geekdom and nerd culture is, and just in general. Like I don't want to understate. I think that's such a strength of this. And plus on top of that, it's good. It's a well done book. It's enjoyable. At some point we should probably, I wrote down to mention the audiobook version of that. So I don't know when you want to talk about that. And
tell us about, I haven't listened to it because I have listened to like 4 audiobooks in my entire life. So Kenny, tell me about it.
As far as I know right now, it's the only one that they have an audiobook for. I think it's another reason why it'll be more accessible to folks getting in. Like one of the issues too with books, just like the proliferation of books in general, like when people are painting and hobbying or whatever they're doing, like it's a lot easier to consume that content when they're on audiobooks. Kind of like keep up on Brandon once in a while, joking with him about they do more of the audiobooks here. Overall, like the book came to life. He was a very good narrator here. The only thing that I kind of like laughed about is sometimes how he does what I think is an Irish accent, or like when he voices Dion. And there's a couple where you're just like, okay, that's not the best accent, but I mean overall, like the performance and everything that he did, like he conveyed it was good. And so like that's another way that it's accessible and people can get to it now. And I think on Audible, right, you just use a credit, so you don't have to worry about some of that risk. And I think it'll just suck you in through that. So I hope they do more of them. But having this be an audiobook, I can't, that's just such a big deal with hobbyists and people that are into the game. It's just they can't necessarily read everything, so they need to have it like on at the same time. So it is a big deal. It actually, I think it really is a big deal.
Yeah, I agree. That conversation is not going away, which I think is a good thing. When we get together as a little wing to SAR massif and all have a chat, it's perennial. It's always coming back around. We're always talking about it. So it's not like So the good news is it's not like okay, we did it once, we're not doing it again. That's not the case. It is always on the menu. Why do the books sell X amount and not Y amount? What do we do to do better? And you start to think of all the reasons, and it's okay. So money, in the grand scheme of things, these things aren't. I remember when books were $3.99 and all this stuff, and they're a lot more. But I take my kids out for a drink and a muffin or whatever, and you can get a book for less than that. So I don't think it's the price. I think it's time. Time's a currency in itself. To ask people to sit down and read this, if you're not that way inclined, you're not going to. But that's part of the hobby, isn't it? Everyone builds and paints. So to have it on in the background, that's easy. That's easy currency. But unfortunately, as I'm told by people in a different part of the industry who know way, way, way more than me, producing an audio book is difficult. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money. There's a lot of complications that you wouldn't necessarily think are there. I wish I could make promises. The only promise I can make is that conversation is always coming back around. So the chance of more audiobooks is always there. It could be just around the corner. I honestly don't know.
I've got a weird idea hearing you guys talk about this, and I've mentioned this on Facebook a couple times with people having this conversation. I don't have the time to read through a book to record it and go through all that, and I can do impressions of accents. I can't do it consistently, so I can't do what people want in a audiobook reader, voice person, narrative person. That's the word. I wonder if there's any appetite, and it wouldn't be something we could do all the time, but it would be something like, hey, if we want to build, because we've had these conversations separately about getting back into the evening painting groups, the Countercharge After Dark. I wonder if anybody, feel free to respond on the Countercharge Facebook page. It'd be interesting to anyone to hop on, let's say on a Friday evening, and just sit and paint and have me read a book for an hour. I don't know. That might be kind of fun. I'd be game if people really thought that was interesting. If we get, 10, 15 people together,
yeah, I could see
I'd
that.
happily read a book for an hour. It's like, hey guys, I'll sit here and read to you and you paint, and let's just see if that works. If people want to give it a try, I think it'd be fun and just show that, hey, yeah, no, there's appetite, there's interest, there are people who think that would be kind of cool. So
I thought you were going to go down like the group participation route that way, where you kind of like assign them different characters.
Yeah, everyone gets a voice.
So you slowly
that'd
record
be
this,
fun.
right?
I think that'd be a really cool way to approach it, but that'd be really complicated.
We'll be done to be like, here's the audio. We made an audiobook for you.
Everyone just pile together, make an audiobook. All right, let's jump ahead into themes. I know in all these we talk about this, and really we get into more of it with the spoilers. But if I remember right, when we first had this conversation, Mark, here on Countercharge years ago, there was the conversation of good versus evil as kind of solidified here. But I wanted to throw in, yeah, there's good versus evil. There's some threads there because you assume Basileia is good, which there are obviously a lot of arguments and people that are like, yeah, they're so good, they're bad, which we can have that discussion at a later point. You don't get into that as much with this book. You don't have that nearly so much as you have it with Ben Stoddard's book, Drowned Secrets. There's some definite bad in Basileia there. But loyalty versus integrity, I think in the reread of the book, to me felt like a big theme. So you have people that are loyal to a person, to a cause, to a concept, to this thing that they've been doing. And then on the other side, you have people that say, I have to look past the loyalty and look at what do I believe is the right thing, is the good thing to do, and attach onto that. Kenny, you may disagree with me that that's a concept or a theme through the book. So what are your thoughts? Am I on board, on the right track, off track here?
No, I think it is. But yeah, it was just kind of neat to see sort of like a classic, I'm going to say chivalric in a way, but you're looking at morality and, you would assume, I think somebody new reading this be like, oh, the knights, they're bad knights, and they have angels, and it's like, they're going to be good and everything. That's what I love about having the Abyssal in there and that whole storyline, which we're still in non-spoilers. Is that okay to say that?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's fine. You can say that much.
There's universal themes in this, and more, I guess we get into spoilers, that I think translate, and they resonate really well still. So I guess maybe a better way to put it is, I see the loyalty, integrity. I see like the idea of like what's good in codes and stuff, without it being a detractor, without it being like, oh, they're just going to have this code, this and that. Like it feels real. It feels like you can relate to it in different layers. And I think it's also one that, depending on where you are in life, somebody younger reading this might think of it a certain way, but when you get older, or if you have kids and you start a family, if maybe somebody served their military at some point, or something along the line. So I think it's that broad appeal, but I like how the idea of like good and evil like exists there, but it's not being like crammed down your throats. Like you're not having messaging like forced upon us, and you have to really decide. Kind of like, how are you going to judge that? Especially, with like the Abyssal and stuff as well. Like there's so many options out there for you. It's almost like kind of like a choose your own adventure. You get to have Dion choose this, and he'll feel this way about himself. Turn to this page, and so yeah. I think that it's done in a way that's not heavy-handed, and that is so valuable, especially these days. So.
Like for Brandon over at Winged Hussar, we now need a choose your own adventure novel. Just saying, that'd be fun. Goblins, choose your own adventure. That would be insane. That would go hard. Mark, what are your thoughts? Again, now looking back and having advanced the storyline, having advanced the characters, having pushed this specific timeline down a few different paths. When you look back at theming and you look back at what you walked into it wanting, what you walked out of it wanting, how do you feel about the theming in the book at this point?
I think the first thing is it's a huge relief to hear that it doesn't feel as though there's heavy-handed social messaging. I'm really genuinely hand on heart glad to hear that, because I think every author's going to face this in their own way, and that's absolutely fine. For me, I want to entertain, full stop. That's it. That's where it ends. I want to entertain. Now, when I was writing with Bolt Action, you're writing about history. You're writing about real things. So when I wrote about the Battle of the Bulge, I wrote about the treatment of African American soldiers in the US Army in 1944. When I wrote about the Battle of France, I wrote about the treatment of North African conscripts in the French Army. And there is a time to shine a light on these things. And I wrote those because I wanted to, not because the company told me to. But I don't want to do that with fantasy fiction. I just want people to have an escape from whatever's going on, and just have kind of a good time reading it, and that's it, full stop. So I don't want there to be any heavy-handed messaging. So it's good to hear that it feels that way. That's great. Themes, that's interesting. When we did, I did English literature, kind of up to the age of 18 here, and when we had to analyse stuff, like proper stuff, Shakespeare, you narrowed it down into plot, character, and theme. And if that's this Venn diagram, and you've got a limited capacity to concentrate on that, I think the plot of everything I've ever written is paper thin. You look at some of the other stuff that Winged Hussar authors have done, and there's really intricate plots. Mine are not. They are painfully simplistic. Theme, not far after it. They're pretty simple themes. For me, what I'm trying to do, it's in the eye of the beholder whether I've got it or not, is to make complex characters. I throw everything into the development of the characters. But the themes wise, I guess the good versus evil and integrity and loyalty, when I put those characters together, be it the main protagonists or the secondary ones, I think I had in my mind the old D&D alignment system as it used to exist. It's like, well, what is Basileia? It says in the rulebook they're good. Okay, so they're good. What does that mean? Does it mean that they're all, fantasy knights in shining armor who just do amazing things and are selfless? Well, I kind of saw it as, if you know the old D&D system, the paladins are lawful good. They are knights in shining armor, but they're flawed. They're human beings. They're going to screw up. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to have flaws, individual flaws in their characters that make them different from each other. But the Legion I saw as a bit more kind of lawful neutral. These are guys who were working for a largely good system, bearing in mind that any system can be a bit corrupt, I guess. And I had that in the back of my mind that you would have that at any level. But they're not trained in the same way that paladins are, that it's all about the morality and the altruism. With the Legion, it's about obeying orders. So there is the Legion characters are more open and more susceptible to blind loyalty rather than integrity and standing up to the system and taking risk to say this is wrong, which you're going to get from the paladins. Because I guess that's kind of the classic expectation of a paladin. And I didn't want to do the whole subvert expectations thing that became popular around about that era. I didn't want to do that. I wanted this to just be an old-fashioned adventure story about good beating evil and keep it simple like that. That was the plan. So I don't know if that answers the question. That's quite a long ramble.
No, it does. It answers from the perspective that you wanted the theming of the book to be thin with intent, but that doesn't mean me as the reader, when I'm reading it, I'm not going to leave the theming as thin by impression. So, and that's, to me, that's the thing I want a reader who, again, if you're a new reader to these series, or if you've read some others, like, hey, why would I go back to it? You're going to read, especially if you've read the other books and be like, okay, I got themes, I got depth, there's some other pieces in this. I don't want to pick this book up and be like, yay, it's fluff and I don't have to care about it. I think you will, simply because, especially in this day and age, there's, for fantasy readers, for people that consume literature for the sake of wanting to consume it, there is the desire to say, what else is going on? How is this impacted? How is this colored by the world that I live in and the environment in which I currently am? And I think when people look at everything through the lens that they have, they're going to get different things out of this book. But I don't think you can skip past the good versus evil, loyalty versus integrity. Where are the humans on that spectrum? That is, to me, an important thing, where this is not, I remember books from when I was young growing up and reading books that were, my grandfather loved Lewis L'Amour, so I read a whole lot of those. That's theming that doesn't exist. Like, there's no theme in most of those books. It just doesn't exist there. But here the theme is a lot of just human, which we can all relate to. Sometimes it's hard to relate to a goblin because, they're not like us. But this is humans. Like, in a human versus human interaction, there's going to be that play of morality. There's going to be that play of how do these people interact in the world that they're in. That, again, second time through, I really enjoyed more than the first time through, because I was looking for it more. I was on the hunt for, where does this fall in the spectrum of books that we've now read? And it's a really solid place. I felt, again, especially for people that are new, to be like, oh wow, okay, there's a lot of interplay between the factions within Basileia that you may not expect, given that a lot of fantasy worlds tend to come from if you're in a faction, hey, that's your faction. Like, that's the thing that you kind of are solidified to, and not that harsh divide between two different groups of it that have very divergent morals and perspectives that are fighting alongside each other and will work to help each other out. Kenny, any other thoughts?
Well, they're fallible too. Like, some of them are just kind of like pieces of shit. It's not just the basic, I'm a paladin. Like you got to see there were shades of gray in there. I mean, even like, there's anger. Like, they get, Ryan gets like pissed, and you have there's a lot more depth than just to have, like, we're soldiers getting out there just fighting. You feel stress, and I have to say also, Mark, you feel like I'm blowing smoke up your ass, but just being like refreshing. And I granted, book, and I consumed it as an audiobook this time, so it's different. But like film and television and nerd culture, geek culture, or whatever, like, I feel like we've had so many stories, or so many like film and television or whatever, where there's just not character development. There's not arcs and stuff, and they just like are super badass and they can just do everything. there's not really a lot at stake. And like, it was so refreshing to see like that's not the case in this book. There's actually like development, and you actually get to relate, and they learn something as they go through. And this, I know this sounds like rudimentary, like very basic, but it's so refreshing. And I know obviously this was written, it came out in 2019, so I don't know if you wrote it like 18 or 19, but
yeah, 18. Again, really glad to hear it, because that was really, really intentional. That was a conscious decision. It was really fashionable at the time, and I think hopefully we're seeing the end of this kind of run of storytelling in cinema and computer games, whatever it is, of exactly what you've decided. And okay, so pick two characters. What are the traits? What have you got? Okay, one of them is a powerhouse of melee. He's a very, very, very strong fighter. Is kind of like physically, I don't know, Chris Hemsworth Thor, kind of enormous. So it's like, okay, so is he a wonderful, lovely guy? No, he's a bully, because he's got trauma in his past, hasn't been dealt with properly. So he's not a nice person at all. But that's his arc. His arc is to beat that and to become a better person by the end of the book. And by the end of the book, he is a better person, but he's still work in progress. An hour before logging on with you guys, I'm writing about that same character. 8 months chronologically down the line, he's still the same guy. He fails and still lapses into his old ways with his temper. So all of them, every character in that, I tried to kind of give a human flaw, not a fantasy thing, just make him like a person, because we've all got our problems, right, and stuff we want to do better at. And I didn't want to write some Mary Sue Ray kind of character.
Both of you pointed out the thing to me that has felt probably truer about this book than a lot of the others, and I think maybe Aaron Cadwallader is the only one that I would probably immediately just first jumps to my mind. Went through a big transition, not the same transition in any way, but he went through a big transition. I see the multiple characters leave the book differently than they came in, and that's not true for a lot of the other stories. There are some minor changes, there are some adjustments, but a lot of those characters, you kind of know who they are, and then seeing their journey through the book and how the book is affected by their trauma, is affected by what they've dealt with, affected by how they approach it. And leaving, okay, they might have a few aspects here or there, but you have some very hard lines that you draw with. This is when this character understands their flaws, understands the problem that they face internally, particularly with Orion. I think Estelle is also one I'd point to in that way. Constance a little bit. So there's like every one of the characters has this little journey, at least, that they go on from the beginning to the end, that you see them transform and shift. Tancred, I would definitely want to throw him in there. You see them shift in their perspective and a desire for there to be another book about them, because you want to see that next step in the journey. And sometimes those are steps back, sometimes those are steps forward, but you want to see where that journey takes them, not from a story perspective, but from a character perspective.
It was certainly the intent. And it comes back to that plot character theme thing. If a potential reader of this series says, it's like, okay, what do you like in world building? They go, okay, I really like the deep political ideology overview. What makes this culture a culture? What's the governance? Who's calling the shots at the top? What's the next tier down? How does it affect everyone? Go read Pride of the King, because that's got it. It's full of it, and it does it exceptionally well. And nothing I have written does that, because myself and Ben, we're concentrating on different things. And having spoken to him quite a lot and heard him on podcasts, I know this is something that's very close to his heart, and he does very well. It's not my focus, and I'm not very good at it. So for me, it is, as I said, it is all the eggs in one basket. It's about characters. It's about character development. I remember my dad telling me when I was young, Sherlock Holmes dies at the Reichenbach Falls, where he falls over with Moriarty. But then he comes back in the next book. The reason was because Arthur Conan Doyle was sick of the death threats, because he did kill Sherlock Holmes and he intended to, But even back then, whenever it was the late 1800s, early 1900s, he was getting death threats in the mail, and he's like, "Geez, all right, fine, I'll bring him back." That really stuck with me because it's like, if you can write a character that people love or hate, but you get an emotional reaction from, then you're onto something. And if you, as the author, if you're not attached to them, again, George Lucas describing Han, Luke, and Leia as like his kids. If you're not attached to them, then it's not fair for you to expect the reader to be. So yeah, that for me has always been 100%. Well, 90% focus has been on the characters, not necessarily the plot or the themes or world building. Kind of overall.
Did you know when you were writing this that there would be a next one, or as far as like the trilogy? Did that inform the writing of this at all, or did you find out later?
I keep making references to Star Wars because back kind of traditional Star Wars, old stuff, I love that. And I ripped off, as I often do, George Lucas. I really do love the way he conducts his business. I think he's great. So it's like, well, what's Star Wars in 1977? It's an ensemble cast where you say, here's Han, Luke, and Leia. And it doesn't matter who's the hero. You pick the one you identify with most and you follow them through their journey. And that's what I've tried to do with pretty much every book. Ensemble cast, split the screen time, and make them all different. But the other thing I ripped him off with was when he did Star Wars, he didn't know how successful he was going to be. So he wrote it so that it can end at that medal ceremony after blowing up the Death Star. But there's enough loose ends that if this is successful, you carry on and you do more. And that was exactly how I wrote it. I don't know if this is going to be a disaster. I don't know if it'll be good and well received. So I ripped off George Lucas, and I did. That was exactly my plan. Have enough loose ends that I could do more, but if it didn't go well, leave it there. That was the plan.
I think it ends with a pretty good to be continued with a question mark, where everyone thinks, yeah, this could go to the next step. This could go, just the story moves forward. We all know the story is not, that the world doesn't end that day. So the next day, everybody wakes up and they have to go to the next thing. There's nothing about this story that you felt it was a complete arc for the characters. Because again, you said character focus. The story ended. Yeah, the episode that this was involved with, where all these characters came together and met, that was done. So we don't have to drag that piece out. You're not bringing the bad guys back into the mix later on yet. But the characters themselves are ready to go to the next thing.
You guys are too kind. I'll have to come on here more often.
All right, so we're going to take a break here very briefly and then come back to the spoiler side of things. I will again remind all the wonderful listeners that if you haven't read the book, now is the perfect time to stop listening to the podcast and go and buy the book or get the audiobook, read it, listen to it, and then join us on the other side as we probably get things that you think about things wrong, and you can argue with us online about it because we love that.
Or you can do what I do, is you buy the physical copy and you get an audiobook.
All right, see you on the other side.
Hi, this is Rob, the Goblin King, and you're listening to Countercharge.
And we are back for the spoilers section of Steps to Deliverance here with Kenny and Mark. We're going to jump into the story, into the details, and kind of go through everything with the perspective of you should have already read the book. And if you haven't, again, please stop now if you don't want to know all the things that will spoil the book for you. But at the same time, reading the book is kind of the whole point. From what Mark mentioned, the character development is really what you're there for. So we may unveil everything about the story and you may listen to it all and then go back and read the book and be like, wow, I totally missed exactly how that journey for these characters went. But go ahead, pause it, read the book, come back. We'll still be here. We're not going anywhere. I want to jump in first with, and we're going to kind of go chronologically, but we will probably spoil later things because you can't not spoil later things given some of the storylines and some of the things that go on as we get through this. So we may skip entire chunks, and y'all can yell at us on Facebook or wherever about it if we skipped your favorite part. My apologies. The opening act or prologue kind of intro into the book is the two paladins, the squire, who's Orion, and then they meet the sister who is going on her own journey of redemption through the actual steps to deliverance, which when I read the book the first time, I was like, that's weird that she mentioned steps. And obviously now I'm like, this literally, she's doing the steps to deliverance, and she kind of missed that in the very beginning. In approaching the opening, when I reread it, I was reminded, and I put it in the notes, that the brutality of life, and that this is combat through the entire book. So if someone's reading it and you read that first combat, this is not long drawn out swordplay. This is not excessive descriptions of stances and things. This is just brutal hack and slash. Everybody's trying to kill everybody, and so you want to survive and kill the thing in front of you. And it's a good introduction to, hey, this is how fighting is going to go in this book. If you're more into, I want long drawn out one-on-one fights, that's not going to be in here. This is quick, short, fast. Nobody survives very long, which is kind of normal for hand-to-hand combat in that sort of medieval style fighting. And I've asked this of other authors, and they've all had a different approach to writing combat. Mark, is your approach to writing combat just purely coming from that medieval history and understanding how that works, or were you trying to intentionally bring readers to that very visceral, brutal level just with intent because that's how you enjoy writing or how you feel it's best to describe it? What kind of pushed you to go that direction with the fighting style through the book?
Good question again. He says, stalling for time whilst he...
Or are you like a method actor? Like, do you go out and actually like fight and kill people and then write about it? Because that's a valid tactic too.
Yeah. Get the old LARP on. It was certainly supposed to be brutal. I have... you get quite a lot of feedback from these things, and I did have someone come back and say that, various stuff is inaccurate. I think you got to kind of question that. So it's like, okay, what can anyone in the 21st century say with authenticity about that kind of combat? A lot of what we know about that era is hypothetical. There's a lot of assumption. So as long as we know it's bloody, but even so I looked at some of the techniques with it in terms of what do we actually know about that kind of combat. There's a German, I think it's 16th century sword manual, which has no text that survived. It's just pictures. So we know stuff from that. So I kind of looked at that. I had a background in fencing with saber and Shotokan karate, which I knew straight away. I'd done enough of that to know it was useless. And I think that's really important. Sharp is a huge thing over here, or certainly was. I know it's got a bit of a following in the States in terms of the TV series with Sean Bean doing what Sean Bean does. But there's one novel in Sharp where he gets his proverbial handed to him by a duelist because the guy's better at dueling with a saber. Then later on they meet on the battlefield and Sharp destroys him because there is an enormous difference between fighting, by the rules and fighting to the death. That's when all the knees to the groin and biting ears and all that stuff comes into it. So I kind of wanted to go about for that. I didn't want to do huge descriptions of stances, exactly as you said. It's supposed to be pretty horrific, but not to the point where it's glorifying violence. It's not supposed to be, like some Hollywood movies. It's supposed to be off-putting, I guess. Not trying to disturb or traumatize the reader or anything, but to say these guys are in a horrible world. And this is what it's like.
That's a good way to approach it. Kenny, what were your thoughts about combat? And again, the introduction to it right at the beginning of the book, and then that sort of feeling throughout.
It is a war game. So I think that's always something that's important to remember that can get dropped off at time. I thought opening up, I think, with some just like brutality and harsh, harshness is good to have. So it sets a tone, which I think is important going through, that you realize like that's going to be like this, or it could even escalate. And I think it also, like the first time I read it, it kind of signaled to me that, okay, this is not going to be like the not saying gratuitous violence, but like it's not going to be like a PG rating thing. It's not going to be like just for ages 10 and under. Like it's going to have that feel of like combat and war in it, which actually that drew me into it even more because some things you'll take a chance on just because of like it's an author you like or for a property. So like when I saw this, I wanted to get into it, but again, from somebody who was very new at the time, I think that kind of signposted going forward the level of the combat because I enjoyed it and like I said, visceral, and so that was good to have on. Like I thought that having that where you did in the beginning was a good place to put that, was a good tool, and I think laid out, it encouraged you to want to go through and do more because I felt like just like the battles escalated as far as like scope and scale, but also just brutality to them and why they were fighting and the anger and all that, like that builds up as you go through the story and everything. So and I'd say that also to like other authors that are going to write will they do another version of the book too, and I think that's very important in the beginning, especially if you're doing a book from a tie-in fiction from a war game franchise. Like you want to get that initial shot, right? Like, so you think of films, it might be like Saving Private Ryan. You like opens up, you're like, oh, okay, hopefully, you want to have that in there. And I think this is one where it was done correctly, and it encouraged me. It made me want to keep reading more because you might want something different out of it. But I thought that was good for this one.
I think it's interesting, Mark. You had previously talked about how you and Ben approach books very differently. Ben Stoddard, who wrote Pride of a King and Drawn Secrets, that you approach it differently. And I think it's interesting to me that the two books so far that we've done in this review that have combat from the same very visceral, brutal perspective is Pride of a King and Steps to Deliverance. The other books, not that they're any less bloody, but you don't have the same brutality as evident in them, and they're written from a different perspective. So it's an interesting way to look at two very, very different books, very different balance between those three circles you mentioned before, but the approach to violence leans into the same thing, and for very, very different reasons. Yours, because you're character focused, you have to have it, if not solely through their eyes, but at their level. You have to have it at their level. And then Ben approaching from the world is dark and painful and things are rough and all these people have all this trauma. That has to be integral to how they approach the world. That violence also has to approach from that same perspective. At least, again, from my perspective. We can talk with Ben about that later. But I think it's an interesting balance between the two, where if you had approached from we're going to keep things light and fluffy, I don't think it would have worked nearly as well with the character depth you wanted to bring in and the evolution of characters you wanted to have, because that first setup, that first fight being as rough as it is, and you get to later in the book and you're reminded, oh yeah, this is that guy. The squire is one of the main characters you're following. The sister is one of the main characters you're following. The approach for those people, a lot of it goes back to that moment. You have the conversation between Estelle and Orion. This is this is our starting point was here. We both look back to the same event as a pivotal, life-changing moment for us. And that's that very visceral time, the very visceral battle that they had, or couple of fights kind of strung together. Any other thoughts from y'all? I wanted to jump into the not nearly as fighty thing and talk Basilean politics here for just a second. Anything else in the combat, or especially that first little sequence in the book?
I think I'll save mine for some of the later combats.
Okay, we'll circle back. Talk about combats as we go through them. Not a problem. All right, let's talk Basilean politics. In that there isn't a lot. There's a lot, but there isn't a lot. And when I first read the book, I remember very distinctly going, oh, cool, we're going to get into like how Basilean politics work. And then it's like, no, we're not. We're going to get into the characters' concepts or interactions with Basilean politics. Again, hugely different from some of the other books where we talk about Pride of a King and so forth, where you get into the politics and you in Honor's Price, the politics. Those are important key parts of how things work. Here, the politics are the thing that make the characters stand out a little bit. That you have the Legion side, you have Hugh, and then you have Tancred as the two opposite pieces on the political spectrum, sort of, not really, but sort of. They're coming from two very different approaches, and they have different reactions. They have different authority. They have all these different things that you sort of like toss in as we're going through the story. But there's never we're going to stop and we're going to talk about how Basilean politics works on the grand scale. It is always very Basilean politics as it relates to me talking to you about the situation that we're in. And you're bringing those elements, you're bringing those pieces into the conversation. Was one that intentional, Mark, or was this sort of you were trying to figure out how Basilean politics worked from the beginning? So were you developing this as we went along, or was this just an intentional, no, I know how this is going to work, but I want to keep it from being a big player in the whole story in the grand scheme of things?
I think the politics was a vehicle to showcase how the leaders thought and interacted. So, there's not a lot on there. I guess part of it is because, again, as we've said, it's a lower level story. It's a story ultimately about soldiers, not leaders of nation states. So it's about low level commanders, junior officer equivalents. It's that sort of story. But whatever's going on politically is still going to affect them. So you look at Tancred, who the inspiration for that character, I forget exactly what the book I was reading at the time, but it was a history book about the Vietnam War, and there was a platoon commander, a second lieutenant, I think he was, who was the son of a senator. It shaped his career and the expectation on him and the pressure. I thought it was a fantastic story to tell. So that's what Tancred is. He's a junior officer who is in the position where he's been promoted quickly because of his father's political influence, not by merit, not his ability, and he knows that deep down. So he's he's trying to be the diplomat between Hugh, who genuinely, he's not a mustache-twirling villain, he genuinely believes he is doing the right thing, and sometimes you need a hard man to make the hard choice, and Orion, who is explosive, but he's kind of like the Frank Castle of the piece in some ways, I suppose. Explosively violent, but underneath it all, he's trying desperately to do the morally right thing, and morality comes above all. And Tancred is trying to keep the peace between the two. One, because he probably thinks Orion's right, but two, because he thinks keeping Hugh sweet will advance his career. And he's a flawed character. He's ambitious and he's selfish, and that's something he's got to get over. So the politics was politics was kind of like the train tracks to locomote that storyline, I guess.
Did you make up the politics, or were you handed this is how the politics works? Again, being the first author, you probably have a different perspective than anyone who would now have to write Basilean stuff, because it is what it is. But was this a blank slate for you?
It was a blank slate with a caveat that once I'd written it, it had to be sent in and all get approved.
Okay.
So it was like, okay, come up with some stuff, and then we'll let you know if it works. How would I describe it? I don't want to segue too much into Pious as a separate novel, but that would be a better way of describing the approach to it, which is Armada comes out, here's the box set, and you've got the Basilean fleet. Cool. The ships are made up of Navy for some and Sisterhood for others. Right, okay, that is absolutely impossible as an author to make that work, because you go, okay, so you've based it on the Napoleonic era where you've got rated ships of the line. Fine. But what you said is the third rates, which are the backbone of the fleet, they're all Sisterhood. It doesn't work, because what do you equate that to? Well, the Navy's a Navy, but the Sisterhood's kind of like, in our real world terms, a religious order, like the Templars, the Hospitallers, something like that. Now, you then caveat that with, yeah, but the head of state of Basileia is the head of state and the head of the church. It's the same person. But it's like, yeah, but there's still a rung underneath them, right? So you've still got the Duma, and you will still have religious leaders. What if they disagree? Are you really going to have a Basilean fleet turn up to a set-piece battle in the open sea and go, yeah, the Sisterhood third rates didn't turn up because there's been a political disagreement at the rung below that you can't. So when I wrote Pius, I was like, okay, so whatever the third-rate equivalent is to an Abyss class ship, the Navy's got to have its own. There's just no models for it. And so I guess that was my approach to it, was to look at the closest real-world equivalents I could find, still accepting this is a world with goblins in rocket-powered gliders. So, just like, let's all chill out here. It doesn't matter that much. Let's not go crazy. But, but try and make it not realistic, but believable.
I think to me, that's the part that is a really hard balance. And again, you approach the balance from, you're going to know enough about it to know that these characters work, but you don't need to know everything about it right now. We're not going to spend 6 pages outlining how all these structures work and what this looks like. That's for future reader / author to learn as we go along. Kenny, what are your thoughts on, again, throughout the book, but obviously it starts here in this post-prologue sort of introducing all the main characters. What are your thoughts on the politics?
See, I like the way this was done. I get this is like more of an approach from me as still a relatively new player. I don't really know anything about Basilean politics. And what it seemed to me like you were doing, so I was glad you talked about Pius, is like, because this is like the first book, right? So this is intro, and I think there's a lot of that intent to, making it very accessible to somebody new and bringing them in. We, rather than get like a civics lesson, like a politics lesson, you just see it sort of like secondhand through, the mercenaries and colors refusing to use, like, wear this and that and all that, to even like the story, like the creation myth story and different people interjecting. And like, I think these are all like, maybe like the best way to say this, but like kind of like planting seeds, or like, like laying for the ground for like that you can get more into this down the road, in maybe a next book, another book or something, or something like it makes you want to go learn, but it doesn't like dump all this on you at first. So you get like the that motivation, like those glimpses of politics and the belief system here, without having to go too far into it. And again, I don't think this is just unique to me. I think this is a lot of people. And I kind of come back to this perspective, like for people that have just done like Warhammer or GW games or Black Library and such, like to have them come over and try a book and a new IP, like an entirely new game, new world. You want to have something like that shows that it's different, but it also makes you want more. And you can see right away, like it's unique and it's exciting. And I think that's what this does. Again, I think this is all this to say. Well, I think this is probably, definitely one of, if not the best book for somebody to start when they're getting in and learning the world. And because it exposes you to so much without like cramming it down your throat or making it, you're like, I'm not sure I'm understanding this, or, like that's very like black and white. Like it's hope. There's something to look forward to. Like it's like this wonder. Like it sets up all of this that makes you want to learn more. And for some people that might be like they want to go buy a bunch more books. They may want to go online or to a wiki. Here we have a great wiki, by the way. Like to have access to it makes you hungry for it. Sorry, my tranquilizers are slowly wearing off, so I'm getting a bit more animated. And again, I know like I'm not trying to kiss your ass or anything, but like. And I can't even see because your screen is it does that weird pixelated thing. So I just see like there's
I was promised you guys would. So yes.
I think you're spot on, Kitty. I think
it's done well. I think like the recipe, it's a good recipe. It's prepared well.
If someone's tentative about reading a book or getting into something, like I don't know if I'm gonna like it. I don't know if this is my thing. This may not be my jam.
With fantasy, it's really it's a big deal. Like it could be like right away. Oh God, I don't.
Being able to tell someone you will understand the core concepts of most of the political underpinnings of this system and not really realize you did it, because we're not going to pause and put everything on hold and explain, again, as I have seen with other books, there are chunks that are like, oh, well, we're going to stop for a moment. We're going to explain how this works. And it is done through the guise of characters in those books too, but it is heavier and you kind of get it all at one time versus you learn about Tancred, and Tancred is going to be impacted very specifically because of how politics works. Orion, he's not. Yeah, Orion's not impacted by politics so much, except that he doesn't care about them at all. Like he's like, no, I don't care what you're doing. I'm going to do the right thing. We're going to go this way. And so it's the characters that are impacted and influenced by the politics rather than them trying to be the ones influencing the politics themselves. And again, counterbalancing to some of these other books that we've had, a lot of the other books that we've had, because politics comes into play a lot. Good overview. As the story shifts and we introduce all the characters, I'm going to break away from the thing that we normally do, which is do this at the end, and say, because we've at this point introduced all the main characters. By the time we get to the first battle, the first real set piece battle that we have, all the characters have been introduced in some capacity. So, Mark, who was your favorite character at the time? Who was your favorite character, and is it still the same character, or have you shifted now to a different character being your favorite?
I'm going to give you a lengthy answer with the answer at the end. When I wrote this, when I put the synopsis into Winged Hussar, this story is Tancred's story. That was the whole plan. He's the primary protagonist, and it's all about him. But stealing George Lucas's technique again, Orion was the Boba Fett of the piece. He's the cool guy in the background who has dark mystery about him and is badass. That was the plan. So a secondary backup character, and Orion was always going to be that's, you know, like when it played like Soul Calibur when I was younger, and you could make your own melee warrior for sword fighting on PS3 or whatever. It would always come out something like Orion.
Mm-hmm.
That was the kind of character I liked when you're playing games or whatever. But I didn't think that would be the best character to be lead. So Orion was my favorite, and Orion was supposed to be a background secondary character, and I failed spectacularly in that plan, and he got bigger and bigger and bigger until by the time we got to the second draft, it's like, this is Orion's story, isn't it? And that was the kind of character I liked to follow, and the idea of that even if someone who is in inverted commas, not a bad person, I don't think he's ever a bad person, but he's not a nice guy, but you can become one if you're self-aware enough to go, I need to have a good look at myself and change, and I'm not surrounded by awful people. They deserve a better part of me, and that's what his journey's about. So he was my favorite character. He was supposed to be minor. He became major. Still is my favorite character now. I also have a big soft spot for Estelle, just because I kind of like the idea of writing a character who, based off the feedback I've got, I think I got what I wanted, which is a character no one thinks is boring, but you either love or utterly despise. And I'm really cool with that. And if she was a real person, I think she would be too. So, that they were the two characters I think are my kind of favorites.
Kenny, what about you?
So, I think going in at first, how do you pronounce this? So, the abyssal guy, is it
Tancred?
No, Tayen, the abyssal
champion. Wow, that's that's like saying Satan is your favorite character.
Yeah. So early in the book, like I was going through, like I think like I got to his point, his reveal, and I'm like, okay, I really like this guy. I like what he's doing. I mean, I can see the whole, like, you know, from it, the case you make, and like, oh well, of course it's going to go this way, and you're going to find out later, like, well, I never said this, or blah blah blah, and there'll be like some. So like that's who it was originally, and then as I got past that point, then I think Estelle, really for me, I think because like there were, reveals and surprises that you get to learn about, like a history, and I I guess I just felt very real too, like when they're doing the rope, the cliffs, and then go down into the little like the lair, and it sort of like presents itself as gruff and confident and everything, but like also is like open to the idea of reality, and that like obviously can't. She's not a Mary Sue, can't do everything, and there is like it has to be some development and such, and there's like a grit to it that disturbs her right away, I think. But she just had so many layers as I were going through, and so I definitely by the end would say that she was my favorite, and I enjoyed her the most. But as I was reading like chronologically, there was a period there where Tayan was it for me, and then I got more of a style like, okay, I changed my mind. But full disclosure, that's how it was as I went went like in a linear fashion.
I think that's interesting because I would probably put Tan on the list of characters that I want more about.
Definitely would, yeah.
I want the next story for Tan, specifically because his approach to how do you get someone to your side wasn't lying to them. It was find out what's their weakness, what's the thing that they are most vulnerable to in the most honest way. And that's what you go at. Not let's play, shadows and sneak around and try to convince them to do something they wouldn't want to do. It's no convince them to do the thing that they really do want to do. Convince them to do the thing that's been nagging in the back of their head. So I agree. I think he's a fascinating character as an abyssal, as a demon that is just hey, I'm gonna be honest with you, buddy. I'm the bad guy, but I'm the bad guy that really you agree with. And that's a really fun, interesting way. So if you get a time in the future, Mark, to be like, all right, somebody wants some more egg, I will tell you, I have not read the next books in the novel specifically for this reason. When we started doing these, I was like, I'm going to read them when we get to them. I haven't got to them yet. So I was like, I'm going to hold. I'm going to get to these. They're on my list. And if he comes back, great. I'd love that idea. But I would also love if it was just a, hey, we got to write something about the Abyssals. Here's how this one, they could all do it differently, but here's how this guy does this. And it is from a different perspective than a lot of us would normally expect to see a demon try to entice a person away from their beliefs or how they do things. So I hear you, Kenny. I hear you on that.
It's a great exchange.
Yeah, it's fantastic. He's like, yeah, this is me. What are you going to do? You going to fight me?
Yeah, when he reveals and everything, I thought that's such a great exchange there. And even like when he gets to like his feelings hurt, you're saying like, fine, like here I was doing all this, but it was like not like in a cheesy way. I thought the exchange was just great. And I went back through it again, actually looked at it, like listened to it again. It's just, I don't know. I appreciate a good villain. And I'm not saying he's a villain, but it's just his role and like just his reactions. I just think were just measured the right way. Like I think you really nailed that character, that reveal, and the resentment. The relationship between him and Dion going forward. Yeah, and I would like to see more.
The idea, I suppose, there's a couple of things with it. You kind of look back into what people in years past have written about, the Bible and various parts of it. That what is the devil? And this kind of late medieval idea of a trident and hellfire and lava, which we get in Kings of War. It's like, yeah, but that's not what he's described as. He's described the most beautiful angel in heaven, and that actually the most convincing lies are the ones that are 90% true. And that was kind of how I was trying to rhyme that what he's saying is he's not there cackling about how I get to devour souls whilst twirling his mustache. In his mind, he believes he's necessary for balance, and that the people he's stoking into, the proverbial lava pits, they're sinners and they deserve it. So there's a natural order. He sees himself as almost like a really, really, really brutal prison governor. That's his role. That he's doing the right thing for society. But he does know, he's still a kind of immortal, all-powerful kind of being, so there's still lies there. But most of what he's saying, it's slanted in a certain way to try and kind of seduce someone across. But yeah, there's certainly there's certainly scope to develop that character a bit. In that, well, I suppose I've revealed them. If you haven't read the follow-up 2 books from this, clearly he survives, because I'm writing the 4th at the moment, and he's in it. But yeah, so there's scope to flesh that character out a little bit more.
That's great. That's great to hear, because I also enjoyed him. I will throw my favorite character in. The first time I read through it, it was Orion and Estelle as that sort of combination of the two. It sort of ended up being the main characters. Rereading it, I go back to Tancred, and he's the guy that at the end of the book, especially and we'll get there with his finale at the very end. He's the guy that I want to see wake up the next day. What does he do? He's the guy that I'm like, I want to see his story. I know Orion's going to have a cool story. Estelle's going to have a cool story. They're going to have cool stuff. They're going to do cool stuff. But he's the one that I think he's the character that I most want to see where he goes in the end. Not that the journey is going to be cooler, not that there's not going to be there's going to be less cool fights with him, but in his journey, he is overcoming the obstacles that are very different than everyone else. And his obstacles are, there's these expectations on him, there's this balance he has to achieve and all this, and it gets to the end of it and he is like, no, that's not who I am. Who I am is going to do the right thing, and who I am is going to be the right person. I'm going to be the paladin, not the senator's son. And his journey is an interesting journey to get there, and completely understandable when he's like, no, this isn't about me. This is definitely not about me anymore. Was great. And I want to see more of him, because I see his journey as a character with his long-term story ends very differently, or has a very different journey to that ending than somebody like Orion and Estelle, and that he's got a fun place he can go. So again, I haven't read the next books with intent. I have them on my bookshelf staring at me, but I intentionally held off on it for this reason.
I do own them. Yep.
They are honestly, they are next on the list if possible. They're what's coming up. So Mark, don't go anywhere. All right, let's jump into we'll talk about the first battle, and then we'll kind of jump through some things, because we do want to pick up the pace a little bit on this. We've mentioned Kings of War in the books as very iconic, and can you replay this battle? I would love, with Pump for Mantic right now, with Champions coming out and Champions being a thing, I would absolutely love to see them come up with a Champions version of this battle. Like, hey, you want to play this battle out? Here are the units you need to do it, and you could play it in Champions. Here's all the stuff.
Cool idea.
Have fun. This first battle is the perfect battle to do that with, because you have exact groups of people. They're all fresh. They're all ready to go. They're all ready to do their thing. And one side has good leaders and has order, and the other side's just got more people. And that's a great fight to have. And Mantic, if you're listening, just say, here's the 2 lists you throw on the battlefield, and have fun with it, and play with your buddy, and go do the thing. And here's the rules for Kings of War Champions. This is exactly what you could do. Go for it. That'd be fantastic. I'd love that. And I know, Mark, we've had this conversation about how do you turn these stories into narrative? Like, how do you bring the battle actually into the world? This is, to me, the one that I would point to first and say, just do this one. Everything else after this is, we can talk about it. But this is one that would just be so easy and so clean. So, Mark, what are your thoughts on, again, the first battle anyone ever wrote about Kings of War, really, like in this focused experience? But what are your thoughts on it now, having written many more of them since then?
I remember someone saying to me about that one that it's very complimentary. Said you really kind of captured how devastating a flank charge is in game. When I wrote that one, I was still really getting to grips to kind of self-teaching this game to at my kitchen table. So the flank charge and the brutality of what happens when heavily armored knights with lances smack into the side of an infantry force. That was based off reading history, kind of like Third Crusade era stuff. So it wasn't really based on the game. A lot of that came, but I did play it out, not in terms of like rolling dice and measuring stuff, but in terms of making sure, does it work? So it was a case of plonking some models down, working out some points values, and the reason that that the way they meet is it's not quite full 40k tournament symmetrical scenery, but it's really simple. It's because it was mapped out, and the thought process was there. It was kind of half medieval history research and knowledge, and half getting to grips with the game for the first time. So it was fun to do. There were lists. The opposition were taken from the Kingdoms of Men list, and there were points values which weren't fair. And so it was mapped out in that way in terms of the planning, but the execution was done based off research of real world warfare rather than dice rolling.
And that's understandable completely. I think in my head when you're doing this, and I'd played Kings of War for a considerable period of time before reading this, my head's like, if this is his first time writing these, he had a game the night before and just didn't see a flank charge. It got wrecked by it, and the next day woke up, well, fine, I'm gonna put that in the. That's how I when I first read it, I was like, this dude's taking some rough flank charges in his day. Because that's what it feels like. And anyone who's learned Kings of War, like, you could read this book and be done with this battle and be like, dude, nobody's ever going to flank charge me. I got to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's really evocative of how the game works and how the world works as well. Because again, that's reality. That's not a layer of the game that's thrown in that you're like, man, I got to make sure this actually works. And how would this, it's just how it works. That's how a flank charge works. It absolutely wrecks whatever it comes in contact with because it's unexpected and you're unprotected. And that's not how a unit is structured. Kenny, as a newer Kings of War player, and you said just over a year into the game, is that something that is evocative to you of the experiences you've had at the table when you do that thing? You're like, oh no, I left the flank open. Please don't see it. Please don't see it. Oh no, they saw it.
It was kind of interesting because it did feel like from their perspective on the ground, like not obviously didn't see flank charge and such, and so I feel like you it's not just a top down version. I liked getting their surprises and their reactions, and hopefully learning for some of them. But it felt like a battle, but also like a mass battle, which is like specifically what I look for like in my war games and such. So I know even like in the book, crossbows are like effective, which is a great thing also to hear. It's like you have like an array of weapons, and I think you guys already said it. I agree.
Well, I know this is kind of the one major set piece battle. There are some others, but they are much more. There's a lot of people, but they are not as clean cut, and the lines are not as easy to lay out on the table. It's a lot more of just very quickly. It's just a big melee. There's a lot going on, and so it's hard to get that same perspective. But it is a fun read to go back and see play out in my head, having read it once before and now reading it again, be like, yeah, I remember how this works. I remember how these things, and basically seeing the pieces on the table, seeing the people in the field. And again, Mantic, 100%. All you could do is say, hey, the Champions rule set. Tell you what, here's the list that we could have done with this. Go have fun with them, and just play it out. See what that looks like. So, just throwing that out there for you, Mantic. Throwing it out there for you. It'd be easy.
That's a good idea. They could even do. They could do like a list from Winged Hussar and just kind of go through and pull out some battles and just make like a free PDF to put up. Just I know someone has to take the time to do it, but yeah, I like the idea. That's a good way, like tie into something like Champions,
yeah,
or narrative.
Yes. Something to get in there.
Seconded, absolutely seconded.
All right. Now, the fallout from the fight, and this is where it blends a little bit in the politics, so I don't want to get too much into it. But we have the balance in the fight with, I said Orion and Constance and their relationship on the one side of the fighting, and then you have Tancred and Hugh, where the politics between Tancred and Hugh are evident in the fight. In that Tancred's got an order, he knows what he's got to do, but he sees that there's a better direction. There's a better choice to make. and making that choice, and then later having to come back and talk with Hugh about it. And he was like, no, I'm glad you did that. And by the way, I'm going to make sure you know that you shouldn't say anything about this later. Like, this needs to be something that now we've got something that there's balance between us. You didn't listen to me, so keep these other things under wraps. It's the give and take on the political side, and then obviously the give and take on the relationship side, where Constance views her people as now owing Tancred, and kind of their relationship to Orion shifting, where he's like, I had to do the right thing. It was the right thing. You saw what happened. I didn't like doing it. And so there's relationship and character building and development in the fight itself, and then obviously immediately after the fight, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's trying to humanize it again, isn't it? It's instead of just saying, I don't know, here's a multi-base of a load of plastic dudes taken from a few molds. You could play Kings of War by just putting out the correct dimension to whatever many millimeters bits of cardboard and push them around. It still works as a game, but it's trying to breathe life into some of them. I suppose that was the whole point. In soldiers don't just turn up, fight, move on to the next one. There's thoughts, there's emotions, there's fears, there's all that stuff. So that was the plan. That was to try and do something like that.
All right, let's jump into the next step. So I mentioned earlier, most of the characters have been revealed before that first battle. The one that hadn't was Estelle. And we get into her story pretty quickly after this. Obviously, we've got Dion doing his thing, which we'll jump into back a little bit of that here in a moment. But with Estelle jumping in, then we get I call that the crypt detour, the cave detour. There's a lot of complexity that is rushed up against. Like you sort of hi, and then we move on. And when I first read the book, I was expecting we're going to get 3 chapters of them going through this thing. We didn't. We get like a little bit. There's a tiny taste, and that's all right, back to the main story, which is a great little detour. Sure would be cool if there was a future novel that you've definitely already written that comes back to this kind of concept. So that is a later novel to discuss. But having that interaction between Estelle and Orion sets up a lot, because it's their first real engagement back and forth. I know at the time, I think we had this conversation the first time we talked about this book, there was trying to bring in Dungeon Saga and bring in the concept of that and integrating it with the Kings of War world, saying, yeah, there's this other layer. There's a secondary layer of gaming, but also storytelling that we're not going to get into a lot here, but it's there. It's kind of sitting just under the surface. When we want to go back into that, we can. Do you like, Mark, do you want to write more in that era, in that style of let's get underground in a cave and kind of go through the things? Or do you prefer the let's stay on the bigger picture and the larger scale of things? Which is your preference? Obviously, now having written multiple books that kind of get into especially the big scale of things.
Okay, prepare for a long answer. There's so many bits to unpick on this one. When I first started writing this, my view has always been, if you're gonna represent someone else's IP, someone else's passion that already has a player base who are really committed to it, you don't just shoot from the hip. You go, it's all or nothing. So I went all in. And I got Kings of War, I got Kings of War Vanguard, and I got Dungeon Saga. And I was like, no, I got to learn all of it, the whole thing, immerse myself in it. I played them all with my son. He loved Dungeon Saga. So we ended up playing that more than the others by a country mile. We were Dungeon Saga ninjas by the time Steps to Deliverance had been written. So I kind of wanted to put it in there first as a nod, Easter egg. Anyone who's played Dungeon Saga will go, "Ooh, there's the Dungeon Master undead raise the pile of bones into skeleton mechanic and stuff like that." Just little things for Dungeon Saga players to kind of go, "Okay, there's something." But that was a different novel and a different story to tell. In terms of what I wanted to tell, it's like again, you compare wargaming to something like role play games. Role-play games, you get, 4-6 people around a table. They'll all make a very, very, very different character. And that's the kind of trope, I suppose, for let's go underground, hunt for treasure, and all. And you can be the elf ranger, I'll be the barbarian, and all that stuff. But if you're writing about an army, that doesn't make sense. It's going to be the diversity comes in people's backgrounds and their actions, not in that one's an elf, one's a dwarf, two a human, one's a magic user, all that stuff. They're all actually on, they look to start with pretty similar, but it's like, no, they're different people. So in terms of writing more, the novel that came after, one of the novels that came after it, Hero Falling, is a full-blown dungeon saga novel. That was never the plan. That's Ben Stoddard's fault, as I've told him, because he said something in an interview about how authors should try and step out of their comfort zone sometimes. And that felt like throwing a gauntlet down in front of me. So that, all right, fine. So Hero Falling was picking up the gauntlets and doing a full dungeon saga novel / whatever you want to call it, really. Traditional RPG, D&D style. Here's a lot of people who hang out in a tavern in between levels and level up and spend their gold and get new stuff and then go back in and find more. It's trying to do something like that. But with a cast of really unlikable people, because I'm sadistic like that. There's like one nice guy in the entire cast of Hero Falling. Who's a salamander, you'll be glad to know. So that was the whole thought. Behind that little scene there was a nod towards Dungeon Saga, because I genuinely believe if you're going to mess around in someone else's sandpit, you owe it to them to learn it. You don't say, yeah, I've got a contract to write 40k. I've written a story about a space marine, but he wears carapace armor and carries a las gun. It's like, no, you don't. You do it. You need to know. You got to get it right, because there's people who have invested so much of their heart and soul into painting, collecting, all this stuff, so you get it right. And that's why Dungeon Saga appears, just as a kind of little nod towards it. There's the long answer.
No, it's good. I like it because your approach is very get it right, which I appreciate as a gamer of a lot of varieties. It is you want to bring those other pieces in and say, hey, this will be fun for the people that really like that. It has to make sense for them, even if that's not the thing you love the most as the author. You're like, hey, let me make sure that these folks get their nod. We get them to understand that, yes, this world also includes these things. Again, I point back to this as a big reason why I want people that are new into the novels to pick this one up, because you're going to find those little threads, those little pieces that aren't just we're a big group of people, we're going to go fight a battle.
It was a good opportunity as well to show some weakness in Orion as a character, who up to this point has gone from being the useless, failing squire he is up until something happens which makes him lose all of his insecurities and replace them with anger, and then start to succeed to the point the pendulum swings too far the other way. But he's a soldier. He is not a tunnel rat Dungeon Saga hero. So you put him in that situation, and now all he is Estelle's kind of killing machine to unleash when she thinks it's the right time. But otherwise, follow me, shut up, and don't tread on any floor tiles that look like they might be slightly elevated and less dusty. So it's to show some weakness in that character as well.
Any thoughts from you, Kenny, on that journey into the crypt, do you think?
I guess the only other thing to add I thought was interesting is a little bit of like a glimpse into some cultural history, or maybe archaeology a little bit, where they're talking about like the mechanics of the tomb and who would have been buried here, why, like how that would translate, of course, to like, oh, these are actually going to be in here with us, and there's a danger. But yeah, I thought that was, again, like dropping a little nuggets of history, because essentially it's world building to me. Like it's helping to develop the universe.
it reminds me of something else that you said that. Okay, so why does she know so much about this? Well, because she goes,
All right.
doing all the tomb raiding. And it's like, well, what was the original character concept I had in my mind for Estelle? Halfway between Lara Croft and Jack Sparrow was the original, and that just didn't happen. So she was supposed to be a far more light-hearted character, more Jack Sparrow-esque, but with the Lara Croft skill sets of, I have a past, but now this is what I do. The skill set stayed there, but the light-hearted character didn't, because just when I started writing the character, she just turned into Han Solo. Even to the point where when you first meet her, I even did it as that this is what this character has become because it just fits better. She, even when she's being spoken to, puts her feet up on the table and picks at the plaster of the wall behind her, which I wrote in specifically for my own amusement, exactly as Harrison Ford does just before he shoots Greedo. It's there just as a kind of, this is a Han Solo kind of character now. Someone who is really, the greatest warrior Estelle has ever met is Estelle. She absolutely loves herself, and that's just what the character evolves into. That was not the original plan. The original plan wouldn't have worked well, I don't think.
I really like her though. I think she turned out well. Like, just there's like the front, because I guess when I went back again the second time, there were things that I didn't really connect and catch so much as like why, how much of a front she's putting up in the beginning, or I guess throughout the whole way to it, and kind of like selectively chooses what to produce and what to reveal about herself, and then even like just interaction with a child, like a younger kid. There's just some, you get to see off to the side some moments that, of course, like Orion or the other characters wouldn't see. So I really like that character. I feel like 100% that's my favorite.
Here's me doing blind advertising for myself then. Hero Falling. I'd give that a go, because that is Estelle is the lead character in that, and I'm not sure that was a good idea. Characters that potentially divisive, who are kind of love or hate characters, because they're really in your face, they're extroverted, they're loud. You're taking a risk with the reader, and sometimes they're better as supporting characters. So whether Estelle should have been the lead for Hero Falling, I don't know. I'm not sure if I rewrote that one, if I wouldn't put one of the other characters to the fore. But that is very much her backstory, training in the childhood, sisterhood, why she left is all in there. That is a big deep dive into that character. There's my advert. So yeah. So Brandon, if you're listening, I did it, dude. I did advertising.
That was a great. I wrote this other book that you just may dislike the core concept of.
Yeah, I wrote this other thing, but I'm not sure I did it right.
I think that's great. I had not pieced the elements for her being Han Solo together. I got her being Lara Croft. I could see your thoughts about her being Jack Sparrow-esque, and that it wouldn't have worked. I think a very different story by a very different author would have worked with her being that character. So I think there's a spot in this world for a character that does that. If there's an aspiring author who's like, oh, that's a cool idea, I want to write a thing, great, go for it. I think the way you approached the story, her character is that, I hate to say unlikable, sort of unlikable. She is unlikable at a distance. And the more you get to know her in the story, you realize that pretty much everything she's doing is half bluster and half truth. And the bluster is for everyone else, and the truth is for her. And that her approach is, I am this good because of her past, because of her heritage, really. And she is what she is because she actually is that good. That is her true thought about herself. And when she finds a flaw, when she finds a weakness, it makes her upset. She doesn't like that. She does not like at any point someone pointing out to her that she isn't the best. And so it makes for a very interesting character who has a lot of flaws, who has a lot of gaps in who she is, because she's almost the exact opposite of Orion, where he is the best, he's worked to be the best, and he wants to drive and find that and keep going. But at the same time, he lacks that arrogance in the interpersonal space that makes him dislike her so much at the beginning. They're both exceptionally good at the thing that they do, and he sees her as pompous and she sees him as one-sided. He doesn't have depth. He doesn't have more than the one skill set that she knows he has. So it's a fun contrast between them.
That's exactly what the idea was going to be, and also, as you said, the heritage. And whilst we're in spoiler territory, she's half Elohi. And it's like, okay, well, that's a stupid concept. So yeah, but Neas Celestis that's what's written in the lore, right? So these things do exist, and it's like, okay, so what I didn't want to do was say, yeah, but they're everywhere. You look hard enough, about 1 in 100 people. It's like, no. In my mind, the way I've written it, not that I'm the custodian of this lore, it's not up to me, but in my mind, they're the only two in all of Panathor. It's just those two. But the difference is one of them accepted that lineage with utter humility and dignity and became a legend. The other one did very poorly with that lineage, became arrogant. In her own words, everything she touches turns to gold, basically. It's like, okay, so you want to be the equivalent of an Olympic athlete, you need to put in years of experience. I don't. I need to put in a week. Everything comes easy to her because of her lineage. So she's not superhuman. She's just able to hit the peak of, human levels of skill with minimal effort. And that sort of person, I think, could very, very, very easily become extremely arrogant. And that's why I wrote her that way, that she's, everything that she does just comes really easily and it's gone to her head. And because of that, people don't like her. And because of that, she fails with the sisterhood and leaves, and then has a massive chip on her shoulder and lashes out at the world with all this arrogance. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the thought behind the character, which is why it's fun. Yeah, it's why it's fun writing the one at the moment, because her and Neas Celestis meet, and writing the meeting between these two was quite a fun thing. Of they don't like each other.
I'd like to see the triumvirate of, you have Neas, you have Estelle, and they're representing the good and the neutral sort of pieces, and I want to see the villain side of that. So someone that was was a child of an Elohi, and they become bad as a result. They take that next step, and if it's their abyssal or if they're just a bad person or whatever the thing is. But I want to see, and it doesn't have to be you, Mark, but I want to see someone take that concept and go to the next logical step of, not only do they reject it, they fully embrace the fact that they're better than everyone, and they become the villain as a result. And that's a very interesting way to have 3 different characters that have the same reason, and the end result is very different. They all get thrown into a room and have to work their way out together. No, I just think it make for a fun villain. It make for a fun bad guy. That's cool. All right, let's jump back into the conversation we kind of started when we started talking about Tan earlier, which is a Dion. And I know you had mentioned earlier, Mark, Dion is probably, his journey is something you felt deserved its own separate story and not as integral to this story. I appreciate it being there. I do feel like we miss some key pieces in Dion's story to understand him and understand his journey and getting to where he gets to, leading an army of the Abyss. What would you do if you had to redo his side of things? Would you just take his perspective out completely? Would you say, hey, this needs to be a separate book, or how would you approach that differently?
even if it was just one more scene, have the transition of going from a Robin Hood kind of universally loved by the people rogue hero to leading an army of demons. Have it a more difficult transition. I mean, if I was being really flippant and giving myself a kick, it's almost like I got this friend who's a bit odd. Dude, why are you a bit odd? I'm a demon and I'm here to convert you to evil. Nah, I'm not interested. Oh, go on. Yeah, all right, then I'll do it. It's not. It wasn't quite as blunt and simple as that, but it could have been more complex. But also, it's not. That's not the story. So it is a story, but I wanted to tell a story about soldiers, ultimately, about knights, about that sort of thing. So it has to have a point of view character. It has to have screen time. You've got to see it, otherwise there is no story there. Where do I do that whole thing again or not? I don't know. I think I like tropes. I don't like cliches. It's like, well, what's the difference? Tropes are stuff which gets used again and again. This is just my definition. Tropes are stuff which gets used again and again because they're classic and they work. Cliches are a bit tired. And I think even in the world of Panethor, it's kind of got to the point where I get some submissions from Wing to Sar get sent to me. You're like, mate, can you just cast your eye over this and see what you think? So I don't get a casting vote, but I get asked my opinion on some stuff. We could almost have Wing to Sar Kings of War submission guidelines. I have a man in New Jersey on speed dial who I can we can make him appear, but I know who he'll delegate it to, so I'm making work for myself. But yeah, there's they probably should, I think, because again, compared to all the other IPs I've worked in, I think Kings of War has had the most interest from people just saying, hey, here's me, I love the game. I've done a little bit of writing, or I've done no writing, but I'd really like to give it a go. And that's really cool. That's awesome, to have that level of interest and people just really wanting to get stuck in. But I think, of all of the sales pitches which come, Basileia is holy and good, but I don't really like holy and good. So here's one which falls to evil. The Basilean evil character who becomes a demon or an undead or vampire, or that's. But I did it with Dion and with Ambira. Mm-hmm. So I'm as guilty as everyone else. I'm not slinging stones. I'm saying that collectively, maybe we've done that now, and I'm part of the problem because I was one of the ones who did it a little while ago. So I'm not sure I'd do that again.
It's interesting you bring up Ambira. She's the one person. So when you have the dynamic between Dion and Tan and Ambira's the one that I'm like, she could just be lying. Like, she could straight up, when she's talking with Dion and saying, hey, this is who I am, this is what I am, she could, from my perspective, she could be lying completely, and she really wasn't. She's just, I've always been a seductress, it's just my thing. And I think later, there's obvious, like, okay, she's not really, but I think she could have been, where I think with Tan, he's the more or less truth teller. He's the one that's just like, yeah, this is I'm just going to tell you straight up, this is how it is, this is how I viewed things, this is my opinion. And she's coming from the other side of, I'm going to kind of just nudge you along and tell you what I think will help you. And that's purely just my perspective. I think, from where she's coming,
based on what they are, because if you look at kind of the whole real world mythology that this stuff's based on, succubus, they're liars. That's kind of their thing, and you see it even in the special rules for the unit, I guess. And certainly, I think it was, I can't remember if it was V1 or V2. One of the lore books goes a little bit deeper and says it exactly as you see with one of the Basilean captains who gets killed at one of the battles, that succubi appear as someone, it gives an example of it would appear as a maiden who needs rescuing, and then when you get close enough, tear you apart.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, that is literally in Mantic's lore, so I'll use that. So yeah, she's a dishonest character. It's part of, I guess the power of that character and how that individual has elevated themselves to the status they've now got in the Abyss.
I don't like hearing me say anything later. Like, it's hard for me to listen to these podcast episodes again because I don't like hearing my voice, let alone I can't imagine how tough it would be to hear someone else in their voice read the thing that I wrote that I hear in my head in a certain way.
I've heard the first few pages of it, and I think Ray Greenley has done a utterly fantastic job. But it doesn't matter who narrates that. I can't listen to it. Because if you imagine your own words read back to you by someone you've never met face to face, it's so like, oh my gosh, I wrote, it's weird to hear. So it's nothing against Ray. Anyone. You could get, possibly with the exception of Morgan Freeman, any other narrator. I don't think I could. It's just so odd to put 6 months of effort into bearing your heart and soul of storytelling, and then hear someone read it back. It's really weird. It's hard to describe. But in terms of the accents for them, I don't know. I probably we default to our own. So I mean, what is Basileia though? I mean, its capital is the city of the Golden Horn, which was an old nickname for Constantinople. Mm-hmm. And you look at it where it is on the map, and the Infant Sea is that an allegory for the Mediterranean? And it's like, okay, so therefore is Basileia Byzantium? In which case they should have Byzantine accents. So in modern day Turkish, I don't know. But then you start to go, okay, well, I don't know where it ends. I haven't started. I'm thinking out loud here. Yeah,
Turkish is not what I would have gotten from.
Dion's an Italian name. A lot of the cities are Grecian in origin. I'm a dungeon master for my D&D groups, and I build worlds because I love doing that. But like this new campaign I've been doing in there's a random generator that generates things. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's line all these things up and make sure that this country has these things, and all the people there are going to have names from this thread. And I'm like, Mantic, I appreciate what y'all do. You've put Greek stuff, and it fits. Like, it fits really well. But you're like, I'm going to put Dion in there, and I'm like, great. What's Dion's? How does he have an accent? Because does he have a Greek accent? I don't know if that works. Is he just Italian? Is Dion Italian? Is he just like, I will never go to the abyss? Which again, I don't think he is. I just think that's a fun question, Kenny. I do appreciate it.
I'm going to make a decision on this. Australian, right? There you go. He's he sounds like Mick Dundee, Crocodile Dundee. That's what I'm going to go with.
See, I kind of like the Italian thing because you could have fun with that. They can come back and it's like, oh, you betrayed Basileia. And he's like, I'm sorry, Ma. I'm sorry. Ma. No, Ma. She's like, you're breaking my heart. As opposed to like, Corky.
Tough conundrum.
Ray, who I've swapped emails with while we were building up for the audio novel. Ray, from what everyone like Brandon, Vince, the guys at Wings are, nicest guy in the world, a nicer guy you could not hope to meet. But so it's nothing against him and what he does to an excellent standard. It's the sheer fact of hearing your stories read back by a stranger. It's just like, wow, this is weird. This is just surreal.
It makes sense. I can understand that. I imagine there are authors that enjoy that, and that would be a very different way than I would be able to do. So I hear you there. What about the Abyss itself? And Kenny, I'll start with you because I want to make sure I hear your thoughts as a new player when you look at the visuals of the Abyss. 'Cause I think, Mark, we had this conversation a while now when we first talked about this years ago. When we look at the visuals of the Abyss, was that what you were expecting? Because it was not what I was expecting.
So ultimately, I want to see more. I like that we got enough revealed that, because I didn't know up until I think it's actually when I read this book the first time about like the parallels of like the Dante Inferno and the layers and all that stuff. But which I thought was kind of cool because now whenever I'm like selling this or pimping this game to somebody and I talk about like the Abyss, like no, because I sort of have to say for some I think some listeners will understand. Like when I'm somebody who does like a Warhammer or GW property for some reason, like okay, well, like this is, so it's not like Warhammer, right? So they're not like just this, because like, there's a period, and they talked about it. Ronnie's talked about it, where like years ago it was kind of perceived as like kind of a GW light or a diet GW, or like when you're done, you come over and do this, and and I love that the game, the lore has progressed and it's become its own beast, and it's very unique in a lot of ways, and I love all that stuff. But something I have to kind of explain is like the Abyss is not, it's not like chaos like that, right? And it's if you have to like liken it to something, and you have to have like visuals, like the circles of hell and such, and so I think overall as India, that's pretty awesome. I liked that we got to see only so much, but not too much. I think like that mystique is there, like that desire to want to know more, I think is good. I love the jokes about, or like the what's he say, like about, like, I'll show you another circle, and like it's tempting, like he could show you more as you stay here, and I think it was done in a way that it was set up that really makes you hungry for more of this concept here. I actually like that it wasn't described. What's the best way to say it? I like the description of it. I like that it wasn't so specific that you knew, like you could draw an exact picture, like your mind has to fill in the blanks. And I think for something like with the nature, and from what I understand of it, at least, I could be wrong, in King's War, like the what could possibly be what your brain could generate to fill that blank in. I think it seems like a lot of like the power for it makes it really interesting. And of course, there's all these interpretations to like to translate to, like, as a hobbyist, painting painting your models and how you're going to make them look, and any background lore you write for them. But I like that it was clear enough that like this is a different idea of like another world or realm or something, depending where you came from, and this is sort of like to us the is hell in a way, and I just I thought the level of exposure was just right, very Goldilocks, was just right, and I want to be able to see more as they go on. Now I don't know. I'm assuming that when you wrote this, like it was already developed enough that like that's in the world, the players like that's what this looks like, and you see different characters come through, like the Temptress, and and how they appear later on, right? How they kind of evolve and change. Like just a glimpse of, like, I know I'm asking more than you just asked, but I'm answering more. And then the authority, like it's kind of fun, like when they come up and then realize like that they have to salute and like keep up the guise of like their military rank and the chain of leadership, the chain of command and such. I just think it was a very nice blend. It was enticing enough to want you to read more and learn more about it. It's unique, and I love just like ambiguity of some things that I think you can sort of let your own brain, your own mind fill in depending on whatever fears and insecurities you have. Sorry, I know that's kind of a bit more than just what you asked, but I thought that might be kind of relevant. Okay, and again, this is a perspective I've been able to provide to these lore videos that I'm on for you guys, awesome people at Countercharge, is like more of a new player, and so he's coming in so entrenched, in history in this other major IP or other major IPs at this other company. So I know I refer to things a lot that way, but I just, that's kind of a perspective I can offer, and I know, especially for bringing in new people, like it's conversations we have because they don't know anything about, like bringing in new players, like here in Wisconsin, it's like they may not know it, but they play Warhammer stuff. So it's kind of like how I have to approach it and to hook it to be able to translate it over.
You're pretty close to where I was approaching it from there. I think the approach for the Abyss is Dante's hell, but it's a real place anyone could actually go to. Like, this isn't metaphysical. This is a place that it actually physically exists on the world. Yes, getting there's the hard part.
I didn't even know that at first. Yeah.
But it's a real place. This isn't a threat of something that is just after life. This is, you could go to that place in this world, and assuming you survive the corruption and everything else, you could look down into hell itself.
Like Disneyland or Disney World.
Yeah, it is the physical thing that everyone knows exists, whether you've been there or not. You know it exists. And I do not want to dog on anyone who makes abyssal armies and they're like, look, it's all on lava. That's fine if that's your approach. When I read this book, I said, I want someday to do an abyssal army that is based on the world that Ambira and Dion are talking in. Not the lava and everything, the floating islands with the weird colors and everything's bizarre. And that is also the abyss. Not just everything's fire and unpleasant and people being tortured, but this is where the abyss just goes to chill, and that's where all the seductresses are, and they just do their thing. That is a very different thing there than happens in the other layers. And I'd love to see, because every circle of the abyss has its own little brief description. And I'd love to see people are like, hey, let's embrace a different one. Let's pull in a different one. Let's make things interesting. I will never be against someone doing the lava thing if that's what they want. But I want people to go, yeah, the lava thing, that's just one layer, man. Let's find what's the next layer. Where do we really want to go to? What's my army is going to be themed around the seductress, temptress angle of them. So let's just bring that in. Let's make sure that we're leaning into that piece. So I thought it was cool. Mark, I don't know if anyone told you how that had to look or how that had to work, or if you just got to kind of make it up and make sure they were cool with it.
We got sent PDFs of all of the existing publications, and you're like, okay, well, I know I can't deviate from that. From memory, I think the way it was written in like V1 or V2 was, it specifically states that highest circle is hellfire, brimstone, lava. So I chose to read that as, because you are stating specifically that this circle is that, I'm reading that as the other ones therefore are not, because otherwise you would have said they all are. And also, again, it's maybe a little bit cliche to say, okay, so what do you do for a living? Well, I'm an abyssal demon, but quite a high-ranking one, but we all love the lava. It's like, maybe they don't, you know?
Like long walks on the beach, lava, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, do you have anything a little bit like the Maldives? Yes, we do. But no, I think that was kind of the idea. It's like, okay, but also, what is an abyssal? And it's like the way it says is, okay, so some of them are evil mortals who've slogged their way up through the rank structure to get some status. Some of them are made up of matter in the abyss, but so if they are, which the latter, which Tain is, he's not an ex-mortal. Whatever matter, whatever substance they're made up of in the abyss. So almost in like a Tolkien orc grown in the ground and just appear with the ability to fight and talk kind of way. There's no raising childhood, anything like that. They just are. And and Tain is one of those. So if you have power where you're kind of in an immortal world, I figured you could make, if you're in one of those circles, you'll make it look like whatever you want it to look like. And it's probably not even a constant. So, anime floating islands, go. Yeah, that was the thought process, I think.
I really appreciated the ethereal, otherworldly nature of what it evoked and how it brought Dion out of the headspace of everything is bad here, and it let him get more comfortable with the idea of, okay, maybe this isn't the bad thing that I think it is. So it gave him some space to work in, which I thought was necessary, and it also brought in some really cool imagery that at some point I'm going to use, because I've got an abyssal army that's probably way too big for my son, who wanted it to ever really want to use anytime in the near future. But he likes the new abyssal stuff, so we're kind of going down that road with him now. And I got way too many models for that army that I haven't even started.
Just an idea, real quick, that I don't play abyssal, so somebody can steal this idea if they know more. But I think it'd be kind of cool. We're talking about the lava bases, right? And like maybe so like you do that initially, and then whether it's like you play your army through a campaign or an event or just in general in the club days, and maybe like you can kind of go progressive like that. So like I say, if Ash is like what's in the next one or something, then like you can then add on top of that, right? So you're going to layer and build on top as you go through the different layers and you descend, and you can kind of do that to represent like your army continuing and over this like narrative play or narrative arc. It's not something I'm not going to do it, so somebody else can do that. But I think that's just kind of like what I envisioned while you were saying that. So.
Or even having like as the units in your army, because you have the succubi that are on this kind of base, and the Ifrits are in this and this. Like you could pick out, and they're like, yeah, they look like they don't go together until you realize, oh, these are just the seven layers, all stacked on top of each other. That'd be pretty cool. There's a lot of cool things for people that aren't me to do, because I take forever doing any of that.
I'm an idea guy. Yeah, I know. I think of things and I never get them done. So.
All right, let's jump back into the story. We've had a little bit of a detour there, and I want to get back into wrapping up towards the end. We hit this phase in the story where really Orion and Estelle are hunting abyssals. They're kind of doing their thing after and again, there's a couple of fights, and you get this space of the individuals, not the individuals, so the pair of them are doing their own thing. And I believe that was kind of your nod to the Vanguard concept, Mark, and sort of that direction of a few people doing their thing and fighting and going through there. Is that something that you felt played out really well, or were there any changes you wanted to make to the journey the pair of them take through that period of time?
I think it was there almost to add a slight element of moroseness later on, in that this is the characters coming together a bit more. The implied romance is not subtle, but it doesn't really go anywhere, because that's real life, isn't it? Again, I'm trying to make things that people can relate to. So while we're in spoiler territory, obviously, they don't end up together, but could have done. So that was part of that journey, is to have a kind of cool, here's two people back to back on hilltops hacking down evil for the cause of good. So the classic hero thing. Vanguard wise, in terms of the intent for Vanguard, let's keep Brandon happy. More adverts. This book splits into two after this. And the other book, Faith Aligned, that follows Orion. And that was very, 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 Vanguard was at the fore for the first half of that. I was thinking Vanguard for that, definitely. So there's like a very Vanguard-sized force doing the storyline for the first half of it. So yeah, I think that was the where I was trying to go with it, was bring the reader on this journey of his as I've we've described with Winged Hussar, my stories, be it Gates of Antares, Hero Fall, Kings of War, or Infinity, they tend to be about beautiful people blowing stuff up. That's the theme of what it's about, and that's what that bit is. It's about classic square-jawed, beautiful heroes slaying evil, to build up to this lovely, idealistic, romantic end, which then falls flat on its face, because that's real life sometimes. So that was kind of what that was there for.
I think there's a space in that part of the journey that when I was thinking about it later, I was like, this is the Reacher-esque part. If you've watched the Amazon series or apparently read the books, I haven't read the books. That's not something I've done yet. But you have the big muscly dude, and there's generally a female person that's involved in the season, and they get to the end of it, and obviously they're romantically entwined, and they just get to the end, they're like, yeah, this kind of worked when we were fighting bad guys, but it's not going to work tomorrow, so let's just go our separate ways. And I think you went to that, you said, that's a path we could go down, but we're all going to acknowledge up front that we wouldn't work when there's no fighting to be done, so let's just not. And I think that works really well, rather than trying to force it in there. I think there's space if anyone on the author spectrum wants to do Panathor romantasy. You're welcome to do it. That's hey, let's have fun with that too.
50 Shades of Panathor.
Have fun. But I think you picked a path that was, this could be there, but we all know that it wouldn't work. And so both characters are like, this is like not.
the way it doesn't, and that in itself is character development. It's Estelle still has the arrogance and expects to be chased and isn't going to do any chasing. Orion, for all of his valor and heroism on the battlefield, chickens out, and he has not got the courage to chase the girl. So he's scared, and he goes, "Oh, okay," and backs off. And that's just to show, that they're still both work in progress. That they're not perfect people by the end of it. So it all falls flat on its face. Yeah, and you kind of, and then you get two novels after it where they go their separate ways and don't appear in each other's novels or anything. So, and then it all comes together in a fourth one. Which I hope will be out by the end of the year. We'll see.
Keep plugging it. Keep plugging it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Brandon is like a spirit of Obi-Wan next to me with like a lightsaber to the back of my head saying, "Do more advertising. Do more advertising." No, so
Thick and Thin.
Oh, so Through Thick and Thin is the follow-up to the Armada one.
That's Armada, right? Yeah.
So Last Light is the last one, and again, a good number of all of the characters from the first three all come together in Last Light, and it's the end of the line for the vast majority of them. Is how the story ends. So it's been four novel saga. You get to the point where it's kind of time to draw stumps, I guess, and move on to something else.
A lot of authors would heavily disagree and say you've got another 6 or 7 in the barrel that you need to get to. But no, I think that's good. Knowing the story needs to end. Know when you say, hey, well, this is the end of this story. Let's shift. Let's do another one. Let's go a different direction. Kenny, any thoughts from you about the Orion Estelle interactions and their relationship building, falling, kind of in that space between when they're first there in the cave and then really up to the end where we see the sort of reunion and sort of aligning?
I think if you go back through it again, like I'm kind of curious now, even just playing like those chapters in the crypt, like to see, I feel like there's so much loaded dialogue in there that, and I could just be projecting, but that's sort of like the way I really feel, but like concealing the way I really feel about you, Orion. And I think there's just like some kind of like depth in there. But I do think so I know Ben Stoddard's not on this one, but he'd be upset if we don't mention trauma at least like 3 or 4 times. But I think there's like, I kind of see, right? Because like when you learn about her heritage, I think there's so many parallels that she can kind of like even subconsciously see herself in, or the need for with it, in Orion, because so he's obviously in the beginning he's like all about like swinging the sword. That's what he focused on, and then he he has an arc and he changes, and like the same with her. So I feel like they not quite like yin and like yang or something like that, but I feel like they really they complement and fuel a lot of the development, even if they don't see it. I think it was probably I think it was even more than Dion and Tan. I think their entanglement, like those two being intertwined, does so much work of the heavy lift, or so much work for the book. Like, you really like the strongest line of development, and I think like through there you have the little lines that come out and permeate into any other parts of the book. Like like the notes that we written down there are outlined for this, and like answers these kind of questions and such. I think it's such a strong pairing, and I really appreciated it more as I went through the last time. And of course, it's always fun about doing these with you guys and having the author on in a group here is like kind of get new ideas as you review things, or somebody throws out something like, oh, I didn't think about it that way, but now I am. And I think like again, I think it's another reason why it'd be good as a first book, or one of the first books for somebody getting into this, is that it's not a cliche relationship or anything like that. Like it's unique, but through them, I think we find out a lot of other characters and their origins and why they do like their trauma, why they do things the way they do, then we would not have seen if they were not paired like that.
I agree with you. I think that there's the play between the two of them it's one of the pieces that makes it, again, I go back to, it makes it a good first book, because you're seeing these two characters, you're seeing more about what's going on with them, and you're kind of like, they expose the other's faults blatantly, and not in a we can help each other, but in a we can't help each other until you fix yourself. Like, you got to fix you, and then we could have another conversation, kind of a way.
Gotta get your groove back.
And that's the trauma. That's the, I mean, it is a very focused, pointed trauma, because they go back to the same specific moment. They emerge, they are created from the same event, and their trauma takes them different directions, and they both have very different journeys to take after that. So I think that's good. I want to jump, and I hate to say jump into the last battle, and I was rereading, I was like, dude, it feels like there's a lot of book left, and I know the book's about to end. The last battle feels like it takes a huge chunk, because there's a lot that happens. There's so much that happens in the space of, I don't know, it's like 12 hours, something along those lines. Like, it's a broad span of time that we're looking at. It's not just a 5-minute fight that we stretched into 3.5 chapters. It's a long, drawn out thing, and it's an entirely separate journey in that last battle. That it's the third act, but it's, compared to the other acts, that the amount of time it actually takes is really small. It'd be a weird to have in a play, but it works in a book. We get Molochs, we get magic, we get like the magic system of Panathor and how that works, at least for the Basilean magic. Like, we know there's a thing with Valetto, who we haven't talked about Valetto, and that's a whole separate thing of trauma. But there's all these things that sort of coalesce into this ugly morass of a fight. And it's a slugfest, and literally everybody's dying left and right. You think someone might be okay, they're definitely not okay. Even the reinforcements coming in to save the day, you think, oh, the Eagles are coming, the Aloha are here, and one of them gets nuked. Like, literally right off the bat. There's 3 of them. Nope, there's 2 of them. And the brutality of that against the summarization of all these other things leading up to it, and you get this end fight, and it's just ugly. Everything is ugly, and these people that are on this hill are just selling out to the last man, to the last drop of blood, to try and keep these people at bay, knowing that there's really not much they can do. Even if the reinforcements get there, unless certain things happen, everybody's going to die. You can't really do much about it. So Mark, when before you started writing this final battle, or obviously started with this battle, who knows, was this as complicated in your head originally, or was it just like evolved into this complicated morass of things? There's no final charge with the Knights of Rohan coming down the hill, the Riders of Rohan coming down the hill to save the day. It was just, no, this is going to be an ugly fight, beginning to end, and there's really not going to be a time where we're like, yay, the good guys win, until right at the end.
Because it was that first novel, it comes back to what we said earlier about what's the expectation of the community. Some of the stuff I've written, you can get really conflicting feedback. So not this novel, but another one. I, in the space of about an hour, saw 2 things online. One saying, I absolutely love the way that this novel replicated the fight mechanics of the tabletop game. And then someone else says, I can't believe this novel is nothing more than a flavoursome bat rep. It's like, okay, so what do? You can't please all the people all the time. So going into this one, I was like, well, it's a tabletop war game. It needs to have war, a lot of war. Since then, the appetite at Winged Hussar, I know I'm because we're talking all the time. Not so much. So we're not saying, okay, no fighting anymore. We just want romance and about the Goblin Postal Service or whatever. It's saying, do what you want. Let's open up the doors and do loads of different stuff. and that's absolutely cool. And so there's different stuff coming. I'm not. I'm going to keep doing war, so I will carry on writing this stuff. But so I wrote this enormous battle to finish because I felt that was the expectation, that it's about a tabletop war game. It's there to support the universe of a tabletop war game. It needs war. It needs a big battle. It needs to end on a big, big bang. And that was why I did it. So it was always the plan to have these escalating battles to start with. Years ago, here's a very tragic scuffle on top of a mountain between a few people. So here's a set piece, small battle. So here's something now where we're in, 1,000 or so rather than hundreds. So, but also, again, I hope it's a trope and not a cliche to have the kind of hilltop final conflict with the player character and the trusted named NPCs of the PS4 game make it through to face the end of game bad guy. That kind of confrontation whilst this battle's going on as well. So that was the plan.
I think there's a space for the characters looking at that map and they're sitting around looking at it and they're like, okay, it could be in any one of these locations, and everyone's like staring at the map, seeing that one that's this X that's on top of a hill that's semi-accessible from all sides but could easily be trapped, it prevented some of it, and they're like, it's gonna be that one. We all know it's going to be that one. Let's just go there to begin with. But I think that's the part where you have to say, what's the balance between trope and cliche? And I think the cliche would have been the knights charging and breaking the line and the Alohi dropping in, and then suddenly there's this huge turn, and at the same time Orion defeats Dion in one-on-one battle, and Estelle takes out Ambira in one-on-one battle, and there's all this happening, and you get the little band of survivors, and they're all the guys with the names, and Genevieve's one of them, and so-and-so's one of them, and that's cliche. And I think what you said is, I'm going to take all of those tropes that lead into that cliche, and none of it's really going to work that well. Like, they're all going to be there. All those concepts are going to be there. But in the end, it's just comes down to a couple of really, really bloody fights that are obviously could go either way, and death happens, and then you're like, okay, now it's done. The good guys win, but there's like nobody left. Everybody's dead, more or less. Out of the hundreds that leave, 3 come back, and that's it. Everyone else has from that original group has died. And I appreciate you're trying to balance between trope and cliche in that moment, because it would have rereading it, I didn't remember how it went, and I got to the stage of, the knights are going to come in. I think this is it, right? I think this is the point where we see the battle turn, and it doesn't. Like, there's a little bit of turning, but it's not. The battle's not done. We know it's not done. The bad guys are still there. And the Ambira dying, you think, okay, that's going to do it. That still didn't do it. We're still in bad shape. So I think that is, I don't know where the line between a trope and a cliche is. I really don't. But I think you took the cliches and said, what are the tropes that are underneath those, and how can I make that not lead back into the cliche? How can I take that idea and not just go right back into the cliche and do Riders of Rohan or do this or do that? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think the line between cliche and trope is going to be different for different people. And trope is an ugly word, even for some people. They want something to shake up the norm every single time they read a story, watch a movie. I don't. That's not for me. I would rather see the same stuff just done well, and that's the sort of stories I like. But you've got to have jeopardy. So if every single character that goes into the novel comes out in one piece, you are telegraphing to your reader that it's like the A-Team. They're going to get hit by a grenade, but they'll get up, dust themselves off, and go, "That stung a bit," and then they're okay, and then they get back in. It's like, yeah, grenades don't do that. So you have to have jeopardy, and as I was saying earlier, you're trying to make the reader fear for the characters. You want in an ideal world, I want every reader to have their own favourite, and then to root for that character and follow that character, and almost go, okay, I'm now on one of the characters I don't care about. Yeah, I don't care about this one. I want to get back to the character I'm emotionally invested in. And but it not to be the same for everyone, to have something that'll appeal to all different readers. And then when you put it at the end, it's like there was never any promise that your favorite was going to make it. So yeah, you've got to kill some off. Yeah, that was part of the thought process behind that. Yeah, and again, to keep it kind of brutal, but that's in itself a challenge, because Kings of War, it's not 40k, it's not infinity, it's not it hasn't, 40k's got a real darkness to the lore. Infinity pulls no punches with the language used in the lore books. There's nowhere left to go. It's an adult audience. Kings of War's not, and I think Mantic are pretty clear on that. That it's also to welcome in the younger players as well. So it's like, okay, so the language in Steps to Deliverance, there's some swearing, but it's not crazy. But the violence is pretty bad. But everyone's okay with that because it's a war game. So you can have a demon smashing someone's skull in with a rock. It's fine. Just don't swear.
No one takes their clothes off, and there's no bad language, so we're good.
Yeah. I think that's part and parcel of just wargaming. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, that's not a criticism of any of it. It's just, I think that's wargaming, isn't it? That you kind of accept that the clues in the title, it's about war. So violence will happen, and you don't need to go crazy with it. But it has to be there, otherwise it's not really a war game. So that was it. It was feels like ending a book like that is honouring your contract to the reader.
Yeah.
Say, here's a big war, and to keep you guessing so that you're invested. Not everyone's going to make it. That was what the final battle was about.
I think it gives perspective for those of us that play Kings of War. And if you don't read the novels and you're not invested and you're not interested, it's just a unit being taken off. And then when you read the novel and you're like, oh wow, everybody's dying. And then I go back and play the game, and it doesn't change what you do because you're playing the game, but there's that reminder of, yeah, everybody's dying. Everybody's dying in here. This is how this works. And it doesn't pull any punches, and it's not candy coated, and everybody's not making it out of this thing alive. And there's a, if nothing else, a common thread throughout every single one of the Kings of War books that nobody's sacred. Nobody has to survive. Everybody is threatened with death, at least at some point in these books. And survival comes down to a decision made, or one stroke of luck happening different than the others, or someone else making the right decision, or you forcing somebody to do something they don't want to do, like making Tancred go and help get the reinforcements. I can see that playing out like in a movie, how tough that decision is. And he's saying, no, it shouldn't be me. And everyone's like, no, it has to be you. This means probably we die on this hill and you don't. But it has to be you because you're the one with the fancy shoulder, the fancy pauldrons. And they will care more about you than they will about us. And that decision making and people having to do the thing they don't want to do, whether that's stay and die or go get the people that will come back to help. That's what makes the Kings of War experience on the tabletop understandable. I will sacrifice this unit so that these units can win. I will do this thing so that this happens. That I think, and again, it is not solely in this book. It is across all the books so far. We see that thread of the morality, the decision making for different characters throughout. So, good pulling there, Kenny. Any thoughts from you about the fight at the end? We've been talking about the brutality of it and the decision making, the cliches that hopefully aren't cliches. Hopefully we're pulling some tropes in and we're looking at some things. But any thoughts from you on how you felt about it and your approach before we get to it is the end of the book, more or less.
What you guys were saying. So I think we're in agreement there about the level of like suspense that was built. Tend to get reinforcements. Sort of like not quite like a field promotion, meaning like where a guy dies and like poof, you're now, but you can kind of see how chains of command sort of that they hold so rigid to, all of a sudden, like maybe they're going to be more open to it as far as like I'll go order some reinforcements or like the sisters coming in like, yep, she's one of us. I answer the question, I speak in code there for a little bit. So yeah, I thought like as far as like that goes, like it's there's the hell and like the fog of war annoying that got conveyed a lot, but it was very much like a Pyrrhic victory, I think, as well, which I really liked that as an ending, as an outcome rather than just like, oh, good guys win, yay! Like again, it speaks to why I think a good example of a initial book, a first book to get into. I liked it. I liked that it ended that way, that it shook out that way. I think that was important, and I heard some of what you guys said already, so I won't repeat everything you just said. But but yeah, a war, because you play those games too, or it can end up at the end like you're not tabled, but like everybody, there's very few models on the table left. So translating that as well, I think it's part of it. Yeah, and again, like the hills and stuff, like the strategy, sort of like just kind of jokingly like totally not portal here, like the neon sign that like pointing down. But it was kind of neat to see like their logic and such as they went through it.
From a Kings of War perspective, this was the classic example of you've lost almost every single one of your units, but you had more victory points at the end, so you win the game. The three individual characters that are still on the table are like, yeah, if we went one more round, it's all over. But we didn't have to. We won. We won when we needed to win. That plays out really well. Let's jump to the end of the book, and here's where I'll probably pull in some of the questions from kind of going into the future of where we go from here. Obviously, you mentioned that the story splits into two. We have Hero Falling, Faith Aligned, and then we come back to, and I just blanked on the name of Last Light, blanked on the name of the next book. So the 4 books in the series. So you see that divergence of characters at the end of the book, where Tancred steps into his power. You see Orion coming to terms with who he is and his discussions with Kel. You see, and then conversely with Estelle and Estelle stepping into a place of, I got to go do my own thing. I'm going to go back to being me, but hopefully not exactly the same me. And you get Constance now with her new path, and we're going to see characters coming back in and characters that we want more out of. Is there anything, Kenny, that you want that is at least different from what it sounds like coming up in the next 2 books? Because I think the next 2 books obviously are what they are. I don't think Mark's going to rewrite them for us. But is there something that you were like, oh, I really wish we had this different direction at the end of the book?
I think that's the thing that jumped out at me the most. Like, I want... Well, okay, so we brought up Star Wars a few times, right? So, like, then we had like this one happen, and then, like, definitely the bad guys strike back. And, like, as far as, like, just a progression of that, where I think, like, yeah, seeing the Abyssals or whoever, other enemies they throw in there, like, really get the upper hand and sort of, like, the bad guys win. But I would also like to see a lot, and again, I don't want to spoiler for me because I haven't read it yet, but I'm curious about the inclusion of like the Elihi and Estelle's like origins and history there if that goes more, because I think the Elohim, like they're really evocative characters, and I'd like to kind of know more about that, and even like some like the faith versus politics and such. So I feel like if that is through Estelle or maybe somebody else in the book going forward that moves on like that, then I'd like to see that too, and I'd also like to see more about the dichotomy of like the paladins and the sisters, because again I don't know much about this army, so I apologize if I'm like missing some basic things, but I could already tell, and I mean if you could say like a space marine and a sister of battle, but I think quite different than that. But having those two in there, I think is I think I just want to see how they play off each other. I think there's a lot of meat there as far as like storytelling to help flesh out, especially now that the narrative is moving forward. We're seeing that with the dwarf books, but I love how Mantic is using the novels as a way to advance like the actual meta, like overall narrative forward. So I like to see what they do with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good way to go. See where we can go with this from here, from Mantic's perspective as well. I like that.
Being like the first audiobook too, so if I'm kind of like torn in between, like if they do get to do an audiobook, like do you do it something else, or do you like go ahead and do like this and do 2 and then 3? So I don't know.
I'd have recommendations if they want an opinion, but that they probably don't want my opinion.
A lot of them where the author just reads, like the author does the narrating.
Authors might hate that.
Yeah, I know some that just do that.
I did. Ben spoke about it. I think I think that's something he obviously that's his story to tell, but I think he'd be quite comfortable doing it. But I'm exactly the same. I'm like most people, hate hearing the sound of my own voice recorded because it sounds different in your own head, and I'm like, oh gosh, I cringe. I can't do accents as well. So everyone else has got an accent, not me. So yeah,
that's the rule.
Oh yeah, no. Ray can do it, definitely, not me.
All right, I want to step into the next piece, which is where we ask our quickfire questions. We already did the one, which is your favorite characters. We could jump past that one. So I will lead off on these and then kick it to you guys. So what made me the angriest, saddest? I had what I thought it was going to be. It's like the biggest quote unquote emotional response. And it probably be different, but like if I reread the book again, it would probably be different. I had forgotten about and wasn't expecting Genevieve's death at the end, and she's a minor character that really didn't get that much screen time, really didn't get that much impact, but she was the counterbalance to Orion, and she was the holier paladin where he was the fightier paladin. And her death in that scene where it's just really her, Valetto, and Orion on top of the hill, really put that everybody's gonna die perspective in there. So again, it may not be the biggest emotional. It was more of the, which is the one character I'm like, okay, who would I not want to die? I was like, I want her to stay alive still. Just because there's like there's some more potential for her path ahead that would be interesting. Kenny, what was and again, I always vary a little bit from angriest, saddest, but what was the emotional response from you from the book? Where was a place you would point to as kind of being important for you?
Not angry, but I guess emotional wise, I appreciated like when he has Orion has the realization like how he treated his squire, and kind of like, oh, I've been a dick about that, and how it kind of do it from like, it almost seems like a paternal moment to me. But I think the other one more than that would be when he is, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name, knows he's going to die and like give this to my, I think it's his daughter, like his children.
Oh, Valetto.
And sets up, sets up that I felt like there's a level of hesitation, and I guess maybe kind of like, playing the movie in your head. But I imagine that going really well, strong and emotional, which, I mean, I guess is a credit to how Mark, how you wrote it. I felt like that was like kind of you feel like suspense that these kind of like values, and while it's a different world, a fantasy world, we talked about like politics and war, like there is some grounding underlying like themes and truths. And I just feel like that was probably the most emotional scene for me.
Mark, what about you?
It's never nice killing off characters. Another author in the team, who I won't name, Scott Washburn, says so sometimes you've got to sacrifice characters on the altar of the storyline, he told me. And he's a far more experienced writer, and he's a great guy, Scott. And I don't like doing it, but you got to sometimes. I'm also very old-fashioned, so I'm uncomfortable with killing off female characters more than men. That's just the way I'm wired. I don't like doing it. But also, Genevieve was a soldier, and I think it respects the character. She goes down fighting like a soldier, which is ultimately what she is. So she's not a damsel in distress. She's not wailing. She goes down with real backbone and courage. And, from how I wrote it, instantly and painlessly, because that's the only way I can write something like that. So, but writing any of that stuff is uncomfortable. But also, I think Valletto's entire journey as a father, it is the biggest cliche in the world to say that you look through a very, very, very different lens as soon as parenthood arrives. But I think it's 100% true. And we've all been through stuff in our lives, right? But and faced adversity. I found adversity a lot easier to face as a single man in my early 20s. I found it easier to be braver by things. But writing about Valletto, that he's now faced with this, and what does he do? He doesn't go, right, let's go. He thinks of his children and backs out, because his duty is as a father. And that's there. And then it's like, no, there's no backing out. I've got to do this. And it takes time for him to come around to face the responsibility that just because I'm a father doesn't mean I get to walk away and let everyone die. I die with everyone. And writing that, particularly as it was where I was in the world and my life, I was with my day job. I've been separated from my family for 4 months, and I was on the other side of the world. Separated from my children. That was, probably based on a bit of real emotion. Not the fear of death at the hand of demons. Let's not go too far. But certainly that kind of adversity as a father. Probably that one. I reckon.
As far as most thoughtful moment, this is always one of the ones that I find difficult, because, and this was weird going back through the second read through. For me, I had to kind of pin down, and it sounds bad because it's not an emotional response for me. This was a thoughtful response, was Tancred's response or reaction to what happened at the end. Because we get Tancred glossed over, he's not ignored. He's a character, and you see him develop. We see him change and transition, but we see less of it from his perspective than we see from some of the other characters. And again, they're not first-person perspective, but we see the focus more on Orion, on Estelle, on those other characters. And Tancred is this character that is hovering around the edges, but not taking the limelight. And then it gets to the end of the book, and everyone's telling him to take the limelight. And it would be very easy. Him in the beginning of the book would have taken the limelight, I believe. I think that's who he was at the beginning. And you see that journey in part because he isn't in the limelight, that he gets to the end and his reaction is not, yeah, absolutely, let me get my promotion, let me do my next thing, I want to advance up the ranks. It is instead, no, honor those who did what they had to do and didn't come home. And that was, to me, the place where his character really did step into exactly what I wanted him to be even earlier in the story, but he needed to take that journey. He needed to get to that point of being what I think everyone in the end would want him to be at the end of the story. So his reaction, his response, I think was the most, I hate to say thought-provoking, because it's just the thing that I was like, good. I'm glad he got to the place where I really wanted him to be, and this is the character that I wanted him to be at the end. And he brought it all home for me. Kenny, I don't know what your thoughts are. If there was a moment that was thoughtful or thought-provoking, kind of in that vein, on the other side of the emotion.
Well, I like that too as well. At the end, like standing up to Daddy, and how that worked out. But I think I don't have the exact line. I'm trying to find it here. But when oh my god, like the devil dude,
Dan.
when he goes, and Dion and they're in the abyss, and there's a line of something he says about like only those who need to fear this are like basically the people that are like the senders of the naughty ones are the ones that actually have to fear her. And I feel like it's kind of dressed like you always hear things in real life like, well, I don't believe in hell, so I can't go there or anything. And somebody who's super religious might be like, well, just because you don't believe it doesn't mean it doesn't exist and have like dominion over you or can grab you, can snare you. And so there's the exchange there. And again, because it's kind of a new concept to me, the first time I read it was like really fascinating, and then going through again, and I wish I'd written down the line. I'm sorry I didn't, but yeah, just kind of explaining what the abyss works, because you're explaining to somebody from the outside, but also taking in his Dion's whole notion of like what he was taught. You want to learn how they learn, how it's kind of hard to demon bad. So I had to like how to unlearn that or open your mind. I think the whole exchange with them from that reveal conversation to then going to the abyss. I don't know, maybe no one else is focused on this as much as I have, but I really like that that storyline, like that development, those two characters together. I got a lot out of that.
Yeah, page 96. I just looked it up. That's it exactly.
I've forgotten so much of this. I need to write more Abyss stuff.
That worked really good. Yeah, page 96 where he says only the sinners and bad people need to fear us because this is our job. This is just what we do. Like, this is just the thing that we do. Everyone, we have to do this because if we don't, nobody will.
It like spits in the face because like the fact versus, is this real or is this just a belief or a fantasy? Yeah. And, like, yeah, I just think it was neat. You get such an intro, but not simplified version of so many aspects of the lore in the game in this book. Again, so which is why I think it's one of the best ones to have as a new book. Like maybe Mark, you might not even realize like how much is in here, like how much has been put in here, how much of the world building it just introduced and sets up. I mean, like this is a very loaded book.
I don't think I have realized it. It's only like listening because it's really odd. This book, it's trickled through. When it came out, we had nothing. There were books before the Wing Tassar takeover. Some other people had done some pretty cool stuff, but it wasn't an aligned effort. And so this has taken time to build up momentum. The whole project, the whole team, everything. And we blink, we look up. More than half a decade's gone by, and there's loads of stuff out there. But Steps to Deliverance, when it came out, it wasn't like this landmark moment where everyone is talking about it. It's taken time. So I haven't had this conversation at the time because it was trickling through, slowly building up momentum. And I haven't thought about it in about 6 years because there's been project after project after project. So yeah, no, you're right. You're entirely right. I hadn't realized. I really hadn't.
Mark's thought-provoking thing is that he didn't realize there were that many thought-provoking things.
There you go. Right.
My thought-provoking thing is the last page because of the rewrite of how it ends, which the first draft ends with Orion snapping and goes to pieces. He goes to visit Valetto and his family, and then as he goes there and sees Valetto's son playing with a soldier, he has a full mental breakdown, and the book ends with Orion completely and utterly mentally broken. And because I wanted to kind of end on I think a cautionary thing of that this is real. And Brandon said, "Don't do that," and he was right. He was totally right, because then I'm falling into the trap of bringing too much real world into it, and it's supposed to be entertainment. So it's like we don't need the we're selling as Paul Sawyer, who passed away briefly, the studio head of Warlord Games, who an absolute legend in the industry. He once told me when I was doing a job for him, when sometimes things get heated between people, and he said, "You've got to remember at the end of the day, we're playing with plastic soldiers. Just everyone chill out." And really wise words from a great guy. And Brandon kind of echoed it, and he's like, "You don't need a cautionary tale about mental health in this. So let's just ease off a bit." So he suggested instead that Orion turns up and sees Valeto's son playing with toy soldiers and goes, "Yeah, ain't it cool? War, it's amazing. Let's go play with toy soldiers. Yeah, high five." And I was like, whoa, that's completely the other end of the spectrum. So we met in the middle where he's a changed man, and it's a sad moment, but he's okay. And he's made a friend, a lifelong friend in Valeto and his family. So yeah, we kind of met halfway, and that whole last page, the various versions of that, I think was the most thought-provoking bit for me. How to end it well.
Someone forgot to tell Ben Stoddard that we can't do that. I love Ben, and I love Ben's work, and Ben is like, "No, we're gonna go there," and I'm like, "Okay, cool, that's good." It wouldn't have fit in this book. It wouldn't have. So I'm the ending that we got is the right ending. So no, I'm happy that it ended up the way.
Oh, well, thank Brandon for that. Brandon is honestly, I've worked. I don't know how many companies now within the industry. I will get off the fence and say Brandon's the best editor I've worked with.
That's awesome.
He's absolutely fantastic. He just gets it. He's really good.
Big props to Brandon. All right, we'll do this real quick because I know we got to wrap this up. In terms of the last of the quick fire questions, what were you most surprised by? I was most surprised in rereading the book how much the book. I was surprised by, for myself, how much rereading the book there was a reawakening in me of how cool the book was in the first place. Because again, it's the first book I read, and I was like, man, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna read it, and I'm gonna be a little let down. And not that there aren't things that I would say, oh, this should change. We should have quickened the pace here, slowed the pace here, modified. I don't know. I'm not a writer. I'm not going to do those things. But I was surprised when I went back and I reread it. And in my head, I said, I know I've been telling people they need to read this first. I hope I'm not lying to them. And I'm like, no, absolutely. This needs to be one of the first books you read, because it's that first, just open your eyes to this entirely different world. If you're coming from GW, or you're coming from Game of Thrones, or you're coming from any of these other fantasy worlds, this is a book that sort of defines, hey, this world's going to feel this way, and there's going to be variances from it completely with every different author. But here's kind of where we're going. That was what surprised me the most going back to it. Kenny, what about you?
I have to say just that Stella, that she was like her lineage, her half. Again, at the time I didn't know until I read this, and I don't even know if that's like a thing. Like, that's very common. But we talked about that a lot through the show and everything. But I was actually surprised. I didn't know I didn't know anything about them really, and that was a possibility. So I thought that was a really cool reveal, and probably the most surprising thing. I love the ending, like you said, but we already went through that.
All right, Mark, what surprised you?
Oh, all of it. I surprise myself on a daily basis. I guess that the thing which I tried to surprise people with, I suppose, is a better way, which I don't know if it's good or a bit cheap, is the reveal that Estelle is the masked sister at the start of it. That was the whole thing, and that's why Ambera is another fallen sister. It is because and also makes a reference. That's the whole point. The line is in there where she says to Dion, "We have met before." It's supposed to get the clever reader going, ha 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 ha. So you met on the day that Dion killed Orion's uncle. You were the sister. And it's like, no, she's not. It's Estelle. And that was supposed to be my cheap surprise.
You gave us a red herring.
I don't know.
Because I reread it this time and I said, wait, hold on. I don't remember that being how that ends. I was like, okay, I'll have to wait on that because I feel like that's a red herring. All right, I want to wrap things up here today, but in doing so, we've talked a lot about this being the first book to read potentially, or at least in that list. I know we probably are going to transition over to either doing one of the next books in this series. We may pull in Pius next and approach that again. So we'll have to look at when and where we can have another conversation with Mark. And I know we'll probably ask online, hey, what else interests people? Because there are other books that are coming out and more things that are coming up. Any final thoughts from y'all before we wrap things up for the show today? And I'll give some plugs and do some things on my end. But Kenny, for yourself, any plugs or last thoughts or anything on your end?
Plugs. You can catch me on podcast is called Combat Phase. So like the phase in the game, shooting phase, combat phase. We just finished recording. Like, I guess I'm in my 13th year of podcasting now, so I just got like a big long interview we recorded this week about that. So yeah, that's on wherever you get podcasts. We've said it a million times, but yeah, I think as far as getting new people into it, like, this is such a good book for that. It's a good book in general, and enjoy it. And it's definitely, make sure that I'm sure Rob will have a link up here so that they know they can go buy it as an audiobook on Audible or wherever else. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I look forward to reading the other ones in the series. And yeah, I'm just going to be repeating myself at this point. So I'll stop there.
Mark, any additional plugs? And you've plugged the next books in the series, and we talked a little bit about Pius, but anything else from your end for the listeners before we wrap up?
There's always plugs. Yeah, no, I think genuinely thanks for kind of bringing me here for this long. I haven't thought about this book in years. It's just been like on my shelf gathering dust, and occasionally for continuity I've got to check something in it. But it's just sat there, and it's been a real kind of nice trip down memory lane, having to think about why did I do what, and so thank you for that. That's been awesome. The only plug I'd end with is just for the team on the whole, which is if people have listened this far and you haven't read any of the stuff, if what you've heard you think, you know what, that's not for me, that's cool. That's absolutely fine. But every single author who's done something to try and flesh this world out has done it in a very different way. So if you think, I don't like the sound of Steps to Deliverance, yeah, that's cool. That's absolutely fine. Totally respect that. But don't let it put you off the series. Have a look at the blurbs of some of the other ones. Find something that's more you, that's more in fitting with what the stories you like. Because there's over a dozen out there now, and they are very, very, very different from very, very different stylistic points of view from different authors. So please do support the cause, I guess, would be my and give one of them a go. That's my final plug.
And I will challenge that by saying if you're listening and you're like, I don't think I'm going to like that, you're probably wrong. You're probably going to like it, and it's still a good read from anyone that hasn't jumped into it. If someone is looking for more information, whether this book or the others, obviously you can go to Mantic, you can go to Wing to Sar, but to me, one of the easiest places is just go to kingsofwarwiki.com. Every single book has its own entry, has a lot of breakdown, but it also has links to where you can buy it and how you can get it in any of its forms. So highly recommend, again, kingsofwarwiki.com.
Yeah, I should note about the books too, right? So like Wing and Hussar, like I'm sure you'll have the links below and to their page where everything is listed. But just if you are somebody coming into this from another property, another game, or even like Dungeons and Dragons books, whatever, so they're paperbacks and they're really cheap. Like like quality, not quality is good, but they're very inexpensive. So if you think like, oh, I pay $30 to $40 for a book every time, like no, I'm not less than that, like less than half of that. So they're very reasonable too.
Absolutely. Go buy them. I think all of them, or I'm missing a couple that I need to add to my bookshelf of Kings of War that I have upstairs. So yeah, I completely agree. The world is out there for everyone to get a hold of and learn more about, and just take some stepping in. All right, I think we'll wrap it up there, and we'll come back and circle back around with either Mark, another author, whoever that's going to be on the next one. We'll post some things online. But yeah, from everybody here, keep reading your books and always keep countercharging.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Countercharge. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at counterchargepodcast@gmail.com, on Twitter at countercharge15, or by commenting on the Countercharge Kings of War podcast Facebook group. If you enjoy the show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Until next time, keep countercharging. Music is a composition of Kevin MacLeod and is licensed